6 months after my wedding, I stood in the kitchen of the house my parents had promised to my sister and watched sunlight fall across a row of pencil marks on the pantry doorframe. Most of the furniture was gone. The dining room echoed when anyone moved. Outside the front window, a red sold sign leaned toward the street, and beside me, my younger sister Ashley held the old brass house key between two fingers, as if she no longer knew what it was for. My father stood near the empty refrigerator space with his arms folded. He looked older than he had at my wedding, but the anger in his face was familiar. "Is this what you wanted, Morgan?" he asked. 6 months earlier, he had stood in front of everyone I loved and announced that this house belonged to his only daughter. The part he never told Ashley was what she would have to sign to get it. Before I take you back to the night this started, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what looked like simple favoritism at my wedding turned into something none of us understood that night. And if you enjoy stories about families, betrayal, and the moment the truth finally catches up with people, please subscribe to the channel and keep listening. My wedding reception was in January, just outside Columbus, Ohio, and by 7 that evening the windows along the ballroom had turned black with winter. Nathan and I had paid for most of the wedding ourselves. That mattered later, though I did not know it yet. My parents were guests of honor, not financiers, and the planner worked for us. I had been careful about that because my mother, Susan, had a habit of calling interference help. She would change a dinner reservation because she knew a better restaurant, rearrange a holiday because another date suited more people, or volunteer you for something and act surprised when you objected. I loved her, but I had learned to put important plans in writing. The reception had been going smoothly. Dinner was finished, the cake had been cut, and the photographer was moving between tables while the band prepared for the last set. Nathan and I had finally reached that strange point in a wedding when the formal parts were over, and I could look around the room and realize that everyone was actually there for us. I remember thinking I should stop trying to manage the evening and enjoy it. That thought lasted maybe 30 seconds. Our planner, Elise, caught me near the edge of the dance floor while Nathan was talking to one of his cousins. She leaned close because the band was loud. "Your mom sent me another cue sheet," she said. I frowned. "Another one?" She said there were a couple of changes to the family toast. My mother had already sent suggestions twice that week. Both times I had told Elise that nothing in the reception schedule should change without my approval. "Did you change anything?" "No." Elise held up her phone. "I forwarded it to you. I told her I needed your approval. Thank you." That should have been the moment I stopped and read the attachment. Instead, one of Nathan's aunts reached me, hugged me, and started telling me how beautiful the ceremony had been. Then the photographer called us for a quick picture with friends from college. By the time my phone vibrated again, I had forgotten about the cue sheet. A few minutes later, I picked up the microphone. I had planned a short thank you, nothing dramatic. I wanted to thank Nathan's parents for welcoming me, my friends for traveling in January, and everyone who had helped us get through a year of planning without losing our minds. I had barely said, "Can I have everyone's attention for a minute?" when my father appeared beside me. Craig Wilson had spent most of his life running a residential renovation company. He was good at walking into a room and making people listen. Even after 60, he still had the heavy shoulders of a man who had spent years on job sites before he started wearing nicer shirts and letting younger crews carry the lumber. He smiled and reached for the microphone. "Let your old man say something first." It was my wedding, and I could have refused. I wish I could tell you I somehow sensed what was coming. I didn't. He had embarrassed me before, but never in a way that made me think I needed to physically guard a microphone from him. I handed it over. Dad turned toward the tables and lifted his glass. "To our beloved daughter." For half a second, I thought he meant me. A few people looked in my direction. Then Dad turned his body and pointed directly at Ashley. She was sitting beside my mother in a dark green dress, already smiling. "To Ashley," Dad continued. "The one who always remembers what family means." The applause started unevenly because half the room was confused. I stood beside him holding an empty hand where the microphone had been. "Mam lyfter her champagneglas." And congratulations to the bride. She smiled at me. Not Morgan. Not our daughter. The bride. I had been called worse things in my life, but there was something about that wording that landed harder than an insult. It was deliberate distance. Ashley was theirs. I was a role at an event. I looked at my mother and waited for embarrassment to cross her face. There was none. She was not looking at me. She was scanning the room. That was when I remembered Elise's message. My phone was still in my hand. I opened my email. The attachment was sitting at the top. Revised family toast cues. I tapped it. The first lines were ordinary instructions about timing. Dad first, Mom second, pause for applause. Then I reached the wording. Craig. To our beloved daughter, Ashley, Susan, and congratulations to the bride. My thumb stopped moving. Below that was another instruction. After the toast, announce, the house goes to our only daughter. My face went hot. My fingers did not shake. But I remember pressing the side of my phone so hard it hurt. Dad was still talking. He had moved into a story about Ashley helping Mom with something during the holidays. People were listening because they did not know yet that the entire toast had been written like a performance. I forwarded the attachment back to Elise. Put this on the screen, now. She was near the AV station. I saw her look at her phone. Then she looked at me. I nodded once. The large screen behind the dance floor changed. My parents' cue sheet appeared in full view. Dad kept talking for another 2 seconds before people stopped looking at him. They were reading. The room changed in a way I can still remember physically. Conversations at the back stopped. Someone near Nathan inhaled sharply. My mother turned toward the screen. Her smile vanished. Dad lowered the microphone. What is that? The instructions Mom sent my wedding planner, I said. Susan stood. Those were private notes. I looked at her. You sent them to my planner and expected her to use them at my reception. They were suggestions. Behind her, everyone could read the words themselves. Our beloved daughter. The bride. Our only daughter. Mom glanced around and lowered her voice. Morgan, take that down. No. It was the only word I needed. Nathan had come to stand beside me by then. He did not take the microphone. He did not start shouting at my parents. He touched the back of my arm and stayed there. That small choice meant more to me than someone trying to fight my battle for me. Dad recovered first. He looked at the screen, then at me, and his expression hardened. You just turned a family toast into a public spectacle. I almost laughed. You sent the script for the spectacle to my wedding planner. We were trying to do something meaningful for your sister, Mom said. At my wedding, Ashley finally stood. She looked uncomfortable now, but not shocked. That detail stayed with me. Dad raised his voice just enough to reclaim the room. Nothing on that screen changes what we planned. Mom reached beneath her chair and picked up a small velvet box. Ashley's expression changed again. This time she looked pleased. Mom opened the box. Inside was an old brass key. I recognized it immediately. It had hung on the small hook beside the pantry door for as long as I could remember. As kids, Ashley and I had used it when Mom locked us out after school by mistake. Dad had replaced the actual exterior locks years later, but he had kept the old key because my mother liked sentimental things. Mom placed the box in Ashley's hand. Dad lifted the microphone again. We wanted tonight to be the night we told our family that the house will stay where it belongs. With family, Ashley will be taking over our home. Several people clapped. A few did it because they thought they were supposed to. Others looked between me and the screen. Ashley stared at the key. I stared at Dad. I did not ask why they had chosen her. That would have been the question they expected. Instead, I asked, "What's the current payoff on the house?" Dad's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Mom answered before he could. "Good Lord, Morgan. This is your wedding." "Yes." "Then why would you bring up something so vulgar?" "Because Dad just announced a property transaction in front of my guests." "It isn't a transaction," Ashley said. I turned toward her. She closed the velvet box around the key. "Mom and Dad are keeping the house in the family." "Through what?" She frowned. "What do you mean? A deed gift? A sale? A trust?" My father stepped between the question and the answer the way he always did when numbers made him uncomfortable. This is exactly what your mother means. You can't just let something be generous. You have to turn it into paperwork. I had heard versions of that sentence most of my adult life. I looked at him. Then it should be easy to answer. His jaw tightened. He didn't. That told me more than the number would have. The rest of the reception never fully recovered, but I refused to let my parents own the rest of the evening. Elise took the cue sheet off the screen after everyone had enough time to read it. The band started again. Nathan and I danced. I spoke to our friends. I smiled in photographs because there were people in that room I genuinely loved, and I was not going to let my mother's script become the only memory I kept from my wedding. I was angry. I was also thinking, those two things can happen at the same time. By the time the last guests began leaving, Ashley found me near the coat check. She still had the velvet box. "Was that really necessary?" she asked. I turned toward her. "Which part?" "You know what I mean." "No, actually, there were several." Her mouth tightened. "Putting Mom's email on the screen. She wrote it for my reception. They were trying to do something nice for me. At my wedding. You already have your own house." I stared at her. "I don't want theirs." "Then why do you care?" That was the question Ashley always came back to. If I didn't want the thing she was getting, then in her mind my objection had to be jealousy. I lowered my voice. "What exactly did they tell you about the house?" "That they want me to have it." "How?" She hesitated. I noticed it immediately. Ashley looked toward the ballroom doors. "There's still some financing to clean up." "How much?" "I don't know the exact amount." "What's the sale price?" "They haven't finalized it." "What's your loan amount?" She rolled her eyes. "Morgan." "That isn't an answer. I talked to a broker. That's all." "Mom said there might be a mortgage involved because of how they have to structure everything. But I'm getting the equity. The house is worth almost $1 million. Have you seen the first mortgage payoff?" "No." "The home equity payoff?" She looked at me. That was new information to her. "You know there's a home equity line, right?" Her face hardened again, almost defensively. "Dad has business expenses. They've used the house before." "That doesn't mean anything." "Maybe not. Then stop acting like I'm signing my life away." "I didn't say you were. You don't have to say it. You do this thing where you ask questions until everyone feels stupid." There it was, old territory. I could have snapped back. Instead, I forced myself to stay with the actual issue. "You spoke to the broker already?" "Yes." "What did you give him?" "Basic stuff. My income, employer, what I owe on my car, that kind of thing. It wasn't a formal application." "Did you authorize underwriting?" "No." "Did you get a written loan estimate?" "No." "Then you don't know what they're asking you to carry." Ashley gave a short laugh. "You're unbelievable." "Maybe. But I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to read the numbers before you call this a gift." Her expression cooled. "You really can't stand it, can you?" "Stand what?" "That they chose me." The words sat between us. I wish I could say they didn't hurt. They did. But hurt and truth are not the same thing. I looked at the velvet box in her hand. "They announced you in front of a room full of people before you've even seen the transaction." Ashley shook her head. "You're making it sound sinister." "I'm saying I would want to know why." She held my gaze for a few seconds, then looked away. "The house is worth almost $1 million, she said again, quieter this time. "How bad could the financing really be?" I did not know. That is important. I did not know the mortgage balance. I did not know the home equity payoff. I did not know the proposed sale price or what Ashley would actually have to borrow. At that point, all I had was a scripted wedding humiliation, an old brass key, a father who refused to answer one simple financial question, and a sister who had been promised enough equity that she did not think she needed to ask harder questions. I watched Ashley walk away with the box in her hand. Nathan came up beside me a minute later. "You okay?" "No." He waited. I looked back through the ballroom doors. My parents were talking to relatives as if they could still smooth the whole thing into something normal. "I want to know what's on that house," I said. Nathan nodded. "Then find out." I did. But the first thing I found was not a number. It was a date. And when I put that date beside the month Ashley got her promotion, I started to wonder whether my parents had chosen my sister because they loved her more, or because she had finally become useful in a way I no longer was. The morning after my wedding, I woke up with 3 things waiting for me on my phone. A message from my mother demanding an apology, 2 missed calls from Ashley, and the email from Elise containing every version of the reception cue sheet my mother had sent. Nathan was already awake, sitting against the headboard with a cup of coffee, and the expression of a man trying very hard not to ask the wrong question. We had gone to bed after 2 in the morning, but I had slept badly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father pointing across my own reception and saying, "Our beloved daughter," then my mother reducing me to "the bride," as if she had never spent 38 years calling me anything else. By daylight, though, the humiliation had changed shape. I was still angry, but anger was no longer the loudest thing in my head. Curiosity was. Nathan handed me coffee. "What do you want to do? Not what should we do? Not what do you want me to say to your father?" That was one of the reasons I had married him. I unlocked my phone. First, nothing emotional. He gave me a tired smile. "That sounds very you. It means I'm not replying to my mother before I know what I'm looking at." Susan's message had arrived at 7:12 that morning. "I hope you are proud of yourself. Your father tried to give Ashley a beautiful moment and you turned it into a public attack on your own family. You embarrassed all of us in front of people we care about. When you are ready to apologize, we can talk." I read it twice, then archived it without answering. Nathan watched me. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." I opened Elise's email instead. She had forwarded the original message from Mom, the attachment I had seen at the reception, and an earlier version that had arrived before the final one. I downloaded everything into a folder on my laptop. I saved the timestamps. I saved the file names. I saved the planner's message telling my mother that schedule changes required my approval. Nathan leaned over slightly. "You're building a file. I'm preserving what happened. There's a difference? In my family, huge." He laughed once, quietly, but I was serious. My mother had a talent for turning yesterday's choices into today's misunderstandings. By the time a conflict reached its 3rd retelling, she could make a sentence I had heard with my own ears sound like something I had imagined. I was not going to argue about memory when I had documents. The house was a different problem. I had asked Dad for the current payoff because the word gift bothered me. Not because I thought parents could not give a house to one daughter and not another. They could. Cruelty and legality were different questions. What bothered me was that I had seen my father use family assets to solve business problems before. The first time had been about 18 months earlier. Dad called me on a Tuesday evening in July and asked if I could stop by his office after work. He made it sound casual. Craig Wilson never asked for help casually. His company had been doing high-end residential renovations around Columbus for almost 30 years. Kitchens, additions, whole house remodels, the kind of projects where people spent 6 figures and complained because one cabinet door closed a 1/4 inch slower than the others. Dad had started with a pickup truck, 2 employees, and more confidence than money. By the time I was in college, he had a proper office, branded vans, project managers, and crews working across the suburbs. When I walked into his conference room that evening, Mom was already there. That was my first warning. Dad slid a folder toward me. "I need you to look at something." "What am I looking at?" "Temporary financing." "For the business?" "For everything." I did not touch the folder immediately. "That's not an answer." Mom sighed from across the table. "Morgan, your father is asking for help. He isn't submitting a loan application to you." "No, he's asking me to look at one." Dad pushed the folder closer. "We had 2 clients, drag payment and material costs hit us harder than expected on the Reynolds project. It created a cash flow gap, that's all." "How big a gap?" His face tightened. I opened the folder. The first page contained enough vague language to make me suspicious. A financing structure involving existing assets, additional collateral, and my participation. Dad had marked several sections with yellow sticky notes, but not the pages explaining total exposure. I flipped farther. Mom said, "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Look for what's wrong before you even understand what it is." "I'm trying to understand what it is." Dad tapped the table. No one is asking you to pay anything. Then what are you asking me to sign? It would strengthen the application. How? He did not answer directly. That was when I asked for the full packet. Not the summary. Not the pages he had highlighted. Everything. Dad leaned back. You don't trust me. That isn't what I said. It's what you mean. No. What I mean is that if my name goes on a financial obligation, I need to know the obligation. Mom shook her head. This is family. Exactly. She gave me the look she used whenever I failed to say the line she had written for me in her head. I took the folder home and read it. What Dad called strengthening the application was not a favor with no downside. My financial profile, income, and assets would make the package more attractive because his business position had weakened. Depending on the final structure, my name could have become connected to obligations I did not control. I called him the next morning. I'm not signing this. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're overreacting. I'm not. This isn't permanent. It doesn't have to be permanent to be my liability. You work in restructuring. You know companies have temporary cash problems. Yes. Which is why I'm asking why you're solving a business cash problem with family collateral instead of fixing the operating problem. That was the sentence that ended the conversation. Dad did not scream. He never needed to. His voice went cold. You know what your problem is, Morgan? I assume you're going to tell me. You think being good with numbers makes you smarter than everyone else. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Then he hung up. I did not sign. That part mattered. I had not spent years emptying my savings to rescue my parents. I had not co-signed bad loans and then finally found courage after losing everything. I said no the first time they asked me to put my financial life behind something I could not control. The punishment came afterward. It was never announced as punishment. It showed up as language. At Thanksgiving, Mom told my aunt that Ashley was the one who understands what family means. At Christmas, Dad made a joke about me checking the interest rate before buying someone a present. At a cousin's birthday dinner, Mom said, Morgan is just practical. Ashley has always been the emotional one. Practical became cold. Careful became selfish. No became betrayal. I corrected them at first. Then I stopped. Not because I was afraid of them, because every correction became another hearing where my mother acted as prosecutor, witness, and judge. Ashley never asked to see the documents Dad had shown me. She accepted the family version. Dad had needed help. Morgan refused. Case closed. That was part of why her question at the wedding hurt as much as it did. You really can't stand that they chose me. Ashley had spent years believing my boundaries were evidence that I cared less. My parents encouraged that belief because it made my refusal easier to explain. Sitting in bed the morning after my wedding, I opened the old email from Dad for the first time in months. Subject line, temporary structure. Temporary. He loved that word. I downloaded the attachment again and looked at the date. July 2024. Nathan was beside me reading something on his own phone. Find something? Just an old pattern. Meaning, my father was already looking outside the business for support a year and a half ago. Does that connect to the house? I don't know yet. That was another thing I had learned professionally. Suspicion was not evidence. Timing was not proof. A pattern became useful only when you could connect the steps without inventing the missing ones. I closed the old financing file and opened the county property records. The family house had been purchased when Ashley and I were children. Dad liked telling people he had paid less for it than some of his clients now spent on kitchens. Over the years, he and Mom had renovated everything except the bones. New roof, new windows, finished basement, expanded kitchen. The place had become valuable. The records showed the original mortgage history and later filings. Then I found the newer home equity security interest. I stared at the date. It was larger and more recent than I expected. Not proof of disaster. People borrowed against houses for renovations, investments, college, businesses, emergencies. A recorded filing did not tell me the current balance. It did not tell me how much remained available. It did not tell me exactly what Dad had done with the funds. But it told me one thing. The house my parents had publicly promised to Ashley was not sitting there untouched, waiting to be handed over like a paid-off family heirloom. There was real debt attached to it. I wrote the filing dates in a notebook. Nathan looked over. Can you see how much they owe? No. Then what does this tell you? That Dad knew exactly why I asked the payoff question. I checked the recording dates again. One of the larger property obligations had been put in place well before the wedding. Then I thought about something Ashley had said. Mom told me there might be a mortgage involved because of how they have to structure everything. I opened my messages. Ashley still had not called again. I typed, "Did Mom or Dad ever tell you there was a home equity line on the house?" I stared at the message before sending it. Then I deleted it. Too leading. I tried again. Ask them for 3 things before you sign anything. The first, mortgage payoff, the home equity payoff, and the proposed sale price. Don't ask what the house is worth. Ask what it costs to get it clear. I sent that. No accusation. No theory. Just questions. Ashley read it 12 minutes later. She did not answer. That afternoon, Nathan and I drove back to our house. We had planned to leave for a short honeymoon 2 days later, and for several hours I forced myself to stay away from the family situation. We opened wedding gifts. We ate leftover cake with forks straight from the container. Nathan read the funniest cards out loud. For a little while, I let the wedding become ours again. Then Mom called. I let it ring. She called again. I let that one ring too. The third time, Nathan looked at my phone. You going to answer? No. You want me to? No. He nodded. That was it. No lecture about family. No attempt to fix me. I appreciated him more for that than I knew how to say at the time. Later that evening, I went back to my notebook. I wrote 4 dates in a column. The first was July 2024, when Dad asked me to participate in his temporary financing solution. The second was the date of the home equity filing. The third was September 2025, when Ashley got her promotion. The fourth was January 2026, when my parents announced the house at my wedding. I drew no conclusions. Not yet. But I circled Ashley's promotion. She had been in medical device sales for years. She was good at it. Her compensation included commission, but she had a solid base salary and a long enough earnings history that a promotion would strengthen an already respectable mortgage profile. She had also paid off most of a large car loan the previous year. None of that was secret. Mom knew. Dad knew. Everyone knew because Susan collected career news the way other people collected photographs. She could tell you who got promoted, who changed companies, who bought a house, and who. I looked at the timeline again. The family sale conversations had become serious after Ashley's promotion. That did not prove my parents had chosen her because she qualified for something. It only told me the timing was worth understanding. My father had spent years saying I saw spreadsheets where other people saw relationships. Sometimes he was right. I did look for structure. I looked for cause and effect. I liked knowing what happened first and what depended on what. But that habit had saved me from signing his papers 18 months earlier. I trusted it more than I trusted Susan's phrase, keeping the house in the family. Around 9 that night, Ashley finally replied. Why are you doing this? I read it once. Then again, I typed, because you asked how bad the financing could be. Those 3 numbers will answer that better than I can. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, returned. You really think they're trying to screw me? I did not answer immediately. I could have said yes. Emotionally, I wanted to. But I did not know that. So I wrote, I think they're asking you to agree to something before you know what it is. Ashley replied almost immediately. That is not the same thing. I wrote, no, it isn't. Then I put my phone down. The next morning, before Nathan and I left for the airport, I checked the county records one more time. There was nothing new. I almost closed the page. Then I noticed something I had missed the day before. The date on one of the later property-related filings was only a few months before my wedding. I checked Ashley's promotion announcement. The dates were close enough to make me pause. I opened the old message where Mom had congratulated Ashley in the family group chat. So proud of our girl. This promotion changes everything. At the time, I had assumed she meant Ashley's career. Now I copied the date into my notebook. I still did not know whether it meant anything. But when I put that month beside the point where the house discussions accelerated, I stopped thinking only about why my parents wanted Ashley to have the house. I started wondering why they suddenly needed her to be able to afford it. The family meeting happened 3 days after Nathan and I got back from our honeymoon. Mom framed it as a chance to clear the air, which, in our family, usually meant everyone was expected to sit in the same room until Susan Wilson had replaced whatever actually happened with a version she found easier to live with. She chose Saturday afternoon at my parents' house. By the time Nathan and I pulled into the driveway, Ashley's car was already there, and so was Dad's truck. I remember looking at the house differently that day. I had spent most of my childhood inside it. I knew which stair creaked, which cabinet door never closed unless you lifted it slightly, and where Dad had once patched a section of drywall after Ashley and I tried to move a bookshelf by ourselves. But after what I had found in the county records, the place no longer looked like a family heirloom waiting to be passed down. It looked like an asset, with obligations attached to it. Mom opened the door before we knocked. She hugged Nathan, kissed my cheek without warmth, and immediately said, "I hope we can be adults today." "That's the plan," I said. She did not like the answer. Ashley was sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee mug and the small velvet box from the wedding beside her. The brass key was inside. She had brought it with her, which told me something about how she saw the meeting before it even started. To Ashley, the house was still a promise. To Mom, it was still a symbol. To Dad, I was beginning to suspect it was something else entirely. Dad stood near the counter with both hands braced against it. "Before we get into this, I want to say one thing. Your mother and I did not deserve what you did at the reception." Nathan looked at me, but I answered. "You sent instructions to my wedding planner, telling her to call Ashley your beloved daughter and me, the bride." Mom folded her arms. "We are not going to relitigate wording." "Good. Then let's talk about the house." Ashley let out a breath. "Of course." I sat across from her. Nathan took the chair beside me, but stayed quiet. Dad said, "There is nothing mysterious about the house. Then this should be simple." Mom shook her head. "Morgan, please don't turn this into one of your interrogations. I have 4 questions." Dad gave a humorless laugh. "There it is. What is the proposed sale price?" Silence. "What's the current secured debt against the property?" Mom looked at Dad. "How much would Ashley need to borrow?" Ashley's mouth tightened. "And why aren't the 2 of you refinancing it yourselves?" That one landed. Dad pushed away from the counter. "Because that is not what we are doing." "What are you doing?" "We are keeping the house in the family." "That isn't a financing structure." Mom stepped in immediately. "Ashley has always loved this house. She has talked for years about staying close. She has the kind of career where she can actually maintain it. You have your own home. Nathan has his own career. You are settled. This was supposed to be something beautiful for your sister. I didn't ask why you chose Ashley." Dad looked at me. I asked how the transaction works. Ashley put down her mug. "They already told you. There's going to be a family sale. That's new." "No, it isn't." "It is to me." Ashley looked irritated. "I told you there was financing. You told me there might be a mortgage because of how they had to structure it. That is not the same as knowing the sale price, the debt, or what you'll actually have to borrow." Mom said, "You are making this sound sinister when it is completely normal. Then tell me the numbers." Dad's patience snapped first. "Because the numbers are not your business." I leaned back. "That's fine." He blinked. "If the transaction is none of my business, then neither is my approval." Mom stared at me. "No one asked for your approval. You asked me to sit here while you explained why I was wrong at my wedding. That is approval with extra steps." Ashley looked between us. "Can we please stop doing this?" I turned to her. "Do you know the sale price?" She hesitated. "Not final." "Do you know the total current payoff on the house?" "No." "Do you know what mortgage amount you're expected to take?" "Not exact," Dad said, "because those figures are still being worked out." I looked at him. By whom? The broker. Us. The lender. People who actually understand how these transactions work. That almost made me smile. You invited a restructuring analyst to this meeting and then told her the people who understand financing are somewhere else. His eyes narrowed. Nathan shifted beside me. Not to intervene, just enough to remind me he was there. Mom reached for the velvet box and slid it closer to Ashley. This is what matters. Your father and I are giving Ashley equity most people her age could only dream about. We could sell this house to a stranger tomorrow and take every dollar. Instead, we are choosing to keep it with one of our daughters. One of our daughters. The wording was smoother than what she had used at the wedding, but the message was the same. Ashley opened the box and ran her thumb over the key. I'm not stupid, Morgan, she said. I know there's still a mortgage. I didn't say you were stupid. You act like I think they're handing me $1 million house with no paperwork. What do you think they're handing you? She looked at Mom before answering. A house with a lot of equity. Maybe I finance part of it. That's normal. They said the mortgage would be manageable. How manageable? Ashley exhaled. I don't know yet. Who told you not to worry about the details until after the wedding? That was the first time Mom's expression changed. Ashley saw it too. Mom said there was no point ruining the surprise by turning it into a financial meeting. Mom lifted her chin. Because there wasn't. I looked at her. You announced ownership before the buyer knew the numbers. Ashley is not some random buyer. That doesn't make the payment smaller. Dad stepped forward. Enough. His voice was low, which was always more serious than when he shouted. You want the truth? Fine. The house has debt. We have used the equity. That is what equity is for. Used it for what? Life. That's not an answer. Business, property, expenses, things adults pay for. How much? He looked away. That told me I was getting closer. I asked again. Why don't you refinance it yourselves? Dad's jaw tightened. Mom said, because the market has changed. That's part of it. Dad snapped. You think I don't know how lending works? I think if another refinance solved the problem, you would have done it. No one spoke. That was the moment the meeting stopped being about my wedding. Dad walked to the window, stood with his back to us, and stared into the yard. Finally, he said, the house already carries enough. Ashley frowned. What does that mean? It means we're not taking another mortgage against it. Because you don't want to? Dad turned. Because it would not make sense. I watched him. That is not the same answer you gave 30 seconds ago. Mom stepped in. Their income picture is complicated because of the business. There it was. Not a full admission, but enough. I said, so the company's income is too weak for you to get the kind of refinance you need. Dad's face hardened. I did not say that. You didn't have to. Mom shook her head. This is exactly why talking to you is exhausting. Everything has to become the darkest possible version. No. I'm trying to understand why Ashley needs to borrow against a house you already own. We own it, Dad said sharply. Subject to the debt. He stared at me. Ashley said, Can everyone stop talking like I'm not sitting here? That cut through the room. She closed the velvet box. Dad, can you refinance the house or not? He looked at her differently than he looked at me. Softer. We could pursue options. That isn't what I asked. His expression shifted again. I said nothing. For once, Ashley was the one pressing. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. Not on terms that make sense right now. Why? Because the company had a rough year. How rough? Temporary. I almost laughed. The word hit me like a bell. Temporary. The same word he had used 18 months earlier when he wanted my name behind his financing. I looked at Dad. You said that before. He knew exactly what I meant. Mom did too. Ashley did not. What are you talking about? She asked. Dad answered before I could. Nothing relevant. It feels relevant. It isn't. I kept my eyes on him. You asked me to participate in temporary financing 18 months ago. Ashley stared at me. What? Mom sighed as if I had betrayed some confidence. Morgan? No. She deserves to know that. Dad stepped toward the table. That was a completely different situation. Was it? Yes. What changed? The business changed. For the better? He did not answer. Ashley turned to him. You asked Morgan for money? No. Then what did you ask her for? Dad said, financial participation. Ashley looked at me. What does that mean? It means my financial profile would have strengthened what he was trying to do. Mom said, and you refused. The accusation was immediate. I looked at Ashley. Yes. She stared at me, as if an old story had suddenly grown another page. Mom leaned forward. Your father was trying to protect his business. Morgan decided her own risk mattered more. It did. Mom's mouth fell slightly open. I did not raise my voice. If I sign a financial obligation, my risk matters. Dad laughed once, bitterly. And there you are. Yes. Ashley looked from him to me. Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Mom answered. Because it was private. So was the toast, apparently. That surprised me. Mom heard it too. Her eyes sharpened. Ashley picked up the velvet box and turned it over in her hands. Is this house thing connected to the company? Dad said. Everything in a family is connected. That was not an answer. I asked the question again for her. How does Ashley's mortgage help your company? He looked at me. It doesn't. Then why did you just say the business was the reason you can't refinance? Because business income affects personal lending. You know that. Yes. So stop pretending you caught me in something. I'm not pretending anything. Mom said. The sale gives us flexibility. I turned toward her. What kind? She hesitated. Dad answered. Breathing room. The phrase was quiet, but I heard it. Ashley did too. What does that mean? She asked. Dad rubbed his palms together as if the conversation itself was making him cold. It means we clear the house situation. We reduce some obligations. We stop carrying costs we do not need to carry. You get a valuable asset. Everyone benefits. I looked at Ashley. She was no longer holding the key like a prize. She was gripping the box. What obligations? Dad's patience returned in a different form. The soft, fatherly one. Ash, you are getting too far ahead of yourself. You have not even completed the application yet. So let the professionals do their work. You'll see the numbers. We'll structure it sensibly. Mom reached across the table and touched Ashley's wrist. You are not being tricked. Ashley did not pull away, but she did not smile. I watched Susan carefully. That sentence interested me because no one had accused her of tricking Ashley. Not directly. Mom kept talking. You have a strong career. The house has significant value. We are giving you a head start most people never get. Your sister has turned one complicated transaction into some kind of morality play because she cannot stand not being the person with the answers. There were a dozen things I wanted to say. I chose one. Then give Ashley the answers. Mom glared at me. Dad said, we will. When? When she needs them. Ashley looked at him. I need them now. The room went still again. That was the first time all afternoon I felt something shift that had nothing to do with me. Dad's entire strategy with Ashley had always depended on comfort. With me, he pushed. With Ashley, he reassured. He expected her to take reassurance as proof. She was beginning to ask for more. Dad tried to smile. All right. Fine. You want the broad picture? The house is worth somewhere around what Morgan said. We are not giving it away free and clear. There will be a family sale. You will receive equity. There will be financing. We still have obligations secured against the property. Those get handled in the transaction. How much financing? We don't know final numbers. How much debt? We're waiting on updated payoff information. That sounded plausible. It might even have been true. Ashley looked at me as if expecting me to challenge it. I didn't. I had learned something useful in the meeting. Dad and Mom were not denying the mechanics anymore. They were managing timing. That mattered. Ashley stood. I need air. Mom started to say something. Ashley was already walking toward the back door. The brass key stayed on the table. I watched her go outside. For a moment, no one spoke. Dad looked at me. You happy? No. You wanted her scared. Now she's scared. I wanted her informed. You don't know when to leave things alone. I looked toward the glass door. Ashley was standing on the patio with her arms folded against the January cold. I know exactly when to leave things alone. I left your financing alone 18 months ago. His face changed. Mom said, that was cruel. It was a boundary. Dad leaned across the table. You think you are so smart because you can always find the downside. No, I think I am responsible for what I sign. And Ashley? She is responsible for what she signs. That's right. Then, let her know what it is before you announce it to 200 people. He looked away. That was the closest I came that day to losing my temper. Not because he disagreed with me, because somewhere under the defensiveness, I could tell he understood exactly what I was saying. Nathan and I left 20 minutes later. Ashley stayed. I did not ask her to come with us. I did not tell her what to do. That was her decision. In the car, Nathan waited until we were halfway home before saying, breathing room. I looked out the passenger window. You caught that too. He said the house sale gives him breathing room. Yes. For the company? He tried very hard not to say that. Nathan nodded. What does that mean? I don't know yet. That answer bothered me more than I expected. I had spent most of my career working with businesses that were already in trouble by the time I saw them. Owners used the same words over and over. Temporary. Timing. Bridge. Breathing room. They did not always mean disaster. Sometimes a business really did need a few months to collect receivables or finish a profitable project. But sometimes those words meant a person had stopped asking whether the underlying problem could be fixed and started asking only how to postpone the moment everyone else noticed it. I thought about Dad's company. I thought about the equity line. I thought about the financing he had asked me to support. And now Ashley. None of that proved fraud. None of it proved he was trying to hurt her. What it proved was that the house and the company were no longer separate stories. That night, Ashley called me. Not texted. Called. I answered on the second ring. Hey. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the broker wants me to complete the formal application tomorrow. I sat down at the kitchen island. Okay. He said he needs the full income documents and authorization to pull everything properly. That sounds normal if you're moving from preliminary discussion into an actual application. I know. She sounded annoyed that I had answered calmly. I waited. Finally, she said, before I do it, tell me what I should ask. I could have enjoyed that moment. A few years earlier, maybe I would have. Ashley asking me for financial questions after spending years agreeing with Mom that I turned everything into spreadsheets should have felt like vindication. It didn't. It felt serious. Ask for the proposed purchase price, I said. Ask what they're using as the appraised value. Ask what gift of equity they're assuming. Ask for the estimated loan amount. Rate assumptions. Monthly principal and interest. Taxes, insurance, and any mortgage insurance if it applies. She was typing. Slow down. I repeated it. Then ask for the seller-side obligations they expect to pay at closing. Why would the broker tell me that? He may not have all of it yet, but you need to understand what part of the transaction is paying off the house and what part becomes cash to Mom and Dad. Ashley was silent. Cash to them? Yes. If you are buying the house, the sale proceeds go to the sellers after secured obligations and costs are handled. But they're giving me equity. They can give you equity and still receive cash from the sale. Those two things can both be true. She exhaled. Mom made it sound like they were basically signing the house over. I know. Do you think they're lying? I paused. I think they're using words that make you feel one thing before you've seen numbers that may make you feel something else. That's a very Morgan answer. Probably. She almost laughed. Then she said, you really think Dad needs this sale? I think he said it gives him breathing room. He said everyone. No. He said it gives us flexibility. Then he talked about reducing obligations. You think it's the company? I think you should ask him. Ashley went quiet again. I could hear something in the background. Maybe her television. Then she said, if they were trying to use me, why would they give me equity? That's not the right question. What is? Whether the deal still makes sense to you after you know exactly what you're taking on. She did not answer for several seconds. Then she said, I'm going to finish the application. Okay. You think that's a mistake? I think an application gives you information. Signing a closing package gives you an obligation. Those are not the same decision. She was quiet again. Mom told me not to worry about any of this until after the wedding. I know. I thought she just wanted the announcement to be a surprise. Maybe she did. You don't believe that. I believe she wanted you excited before you saw the numbers. That sounds the same as saying she manipulated me. I didn't say that. But you're thinking it. I looked at the dark kitchen window. No, I'm thinking the timing matters. Ashley sighed. Good night, Morgan. Good night. She ended the call. I sat there for a while after the screen went dark. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something other than anger toward her. Not forgiveness, not trust, concern, because Ashley was no longer asking whether I was jealous. She was asking what she needed to know before she signed. And the next morning, when she told me she had submitted the formal application, I realized something had changed. My parents had wanted the house to feel like a gift. Ashley had finally begun treating it like a transaction. A few hours later, she sent me one more message. The broker says the written estimate should come once they finish the initial review. Then another. Dad keeps saying this will give everyone breathing room. I stared at those words. Everyone. I thought about my father's company, the old financing packet, and the home equity filing. Then I typed back the only question that mattered. Ask him exactly who needs the room. Ashley came to my house 2 evenings later with a legal pad, a printed copy of the broker's preliminary worksheet, and an expression I had almost never seen on her face when money was involved. She was not defensive. She was not trying to prove me wrong. She looked annoyed that she needed help, which was different. Nathan was still at work, so it was just the two of us at the kitchen island when she pushed the papers toward me and said, "Explain this without turning it into a speech about Mom and Dad." I can do that. And don't tell me what to do. I wasn't planning to. She gave me a look that suggested she did not entirely believe me. I pulled the first page closer. I'll tell you what the numbers mean. I won't make the decision for you. Fine. That boundary mattered to me more than she knew. I had spent enough time at work watching people ask for analysis when what they really wanted was permission. If I told Ashley to walk away, and she did, our parents would spend the rest of their lives saying I had taken the house from her. If I told her to proceed and something went wrong, she could spend the rest of hers blaming me. I wanted her informed. I did not want ownership of her choice. The worksheet did not contain final figures yet. It had a rough property value, an estimated family sale price range, and an early mortgage scenario based on the income Ashley had given the broker. There were disclaimers everywhere because she had not received the complete written estimate yet. Ashley tapped the number beside estimated market value. Almost $1 million. Approximately. And Mom and Dad are talking about selling it to me for less. Yes. So that difference is mine. Potentially. As equity. That sounds pretty good. It can be. She frowned. You always say things like that. Like what? It can be. Depending. Potentially. Because those words matter. She crossed her arms. I turned the page around so she could see it. Let's separate 4 things. Value is what the property is worth. Debt is what is still secured against it. Equity is value minus debt. Your mortgage is what you personally borrow to complete the purchase. I know what equity is. I know you do. Then why are you explaining it like I'm 12? Because you keep using equity and free house like they mean the same thing. I never said free. You said almost $1 million. She opened her mouth, then stopped. I continued before the conversation turned into another argument. If the house is worth $950,000 and they sell it to you for less, yes, you may start with real equity. That is valuable. But the amount you have to finance still matters, because that is the obligation you carry every month. Ashley looked down at the worksheet again. So, the gift of equity is basically the discount. Broadly, yes. They sell below market value, and part of the difference can be treated as equity you receive rather than cash you have to bring in. And that helps my down payment. Yes. She looked relieved for a moment. So Mom wasn't lying. I didn't say she was. But you keep acting like there's something wrong with it. There's nothing inherently wrong with a family sale. Ashley stared at me. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to say the structure itself proved our parents were using her. It did not. That was one of the things I had to keep reminding myself. A bad motive did not automatically make every document fraudulent. A manipulative parent could still use a perfectly legal transaction. If I started calling normal mortgage mechanics a scam just because I distrusted mom and dad, then I would become exactly what they accused me of being. Someone who decided the conclusion first and forced every fact to fit it. I tapped the monthly payment section. This is what you need to care about more than the headline value. Ashley leaned closer. The number was still an estimate, but even the preliminary range was higher than she had expected. Her eyebrows moved slightly. That includes taxes? Not all of them yet. This is still rough. So it could be higher. Yes. She sat back. I can afford that. Maybe. There you go again. Affording a payment and wanting that payment are different questions. She exhaled through her nose. What would you do? I looked at her. You told me not to tell you what to do. That was before I hated all of this. I'm still not deciding for you. She rolled her eyes, but she did not argue. I pushed the worksheet back. When the written estimate comes, look at the monthly payment, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and whatever you would have left after all of that. Do not look at the appraised value and assume that number pays your electric bill. Ashley gave me a reluctant half-smile. I'm not that stupid. I know. That was the strange thing about Ashley. She was not financially incompetent. She had managed a commission-heavy career for years. She knew how to budget. She negotiated contracts with hospital systems. She had a strong credit profile because she paid her bills on time and did not carry much consumer debt. What she lacked was not intelligence. She had trusted the description. Mom had said the house was a gift. Dad had said they were giving her a head start. Ashley had filled in the blanks with the version that felt best. I might have done the same thing if I had trusted them the way she did. That thought was uncomfortable enough that I did not say it aloud. Ashley flipped to another page. What does this part mean? The worksheet referenced seller obligations to be satisfied at closing, probably existing secured debt against the property, Dad's mortgage, and whatever remains on the home equity line. She stared at the phrase. How much is that? I don't know. You looked it up. I found the recorded security interest. That does not tell me the current payoff. So how do we find out? The sellers request payoff statements. You may see those numbers reflected in the transaction package later. She nodded slowly. Dad said the line was for business expenses. He said business, property, expenses, and life. That's not exactly the same thing. No. Ashley looked at me. You think he used a lot of it for the company? I think the company and the house have been financially connected for longer than you realized. That sounds like yes. It sounds like what I said. She pushed the legal pad aside. You're exhausting. So I've been told. That made her laugh, and for a few seconds the tension loosened. Then she asked, How bad is the company? I don't know. You work in restructuring. I don't work in Dad's company. But you've seen things. I've seen what he sent me 18 months ago. I've seen the recorded property filings. I've heard what he said at the meeting. That is not the same thing as having his books. Ashley looked disappointed. I understood why. Once you begin suspecting a hidden problem, you want someone to tell you exactly how big it is. Uncertainty feels worse than a bad number. But I would not invent certainty for her. What did you see when he asked you to help? She asked. Enough to know there was a cash flow problem and he wanted outside support. How much? The packet did not give me a clean number I trusted. Why? Because the summary was written to sound temporary. The exposure was in the details. Ashley looked away. That word again. Temporary? She nodded. Dad used it with me too. He said whatever they were doing with the house was just a way to simplify things for a while. I wrote that down on the legal pad. Ashley noticed. You literally make notes during family conversations. I make notes after people use the same word in different financial situations. That is somehow worse. But she was smiling when she said it. We spent another hour going through what she had. Nothing in those pages proved our parents were trying to harm her. If anything, the early structure could still have been attractive under the right numbers. That was what made the situation more complicated. If the deal had been obviously terrible, Ashley would have walked away immediately. The danger was that the house had enough real value to make every unanswered question feel easier to ignore. Before she left, she stood at my front door and looked back at me. Do you think I'm an idiot for being excited? No. Do you think they picked me because they need my credit? I hesitated. I think they need someone with a stronger borrower profile than they have right now. That isn't what I asked. It's what I can prove. She studied my face for a moment. I hate when you do that. Do what? Refuse to say the thing you obviously think. I spent years being accused of making everything sound worse than it was. I'm trying not to do that. Ashley's expression softened just slightly. Then she picked up her papers and left. The next part came from information Dad had already shared with me over the previous 2 years. Not from some secret set of books I suddenly acquired. His company's decline had not been dramatic. That was probably why he had been able to deny it for so long. Businesses rarely collapse because one villainous invoice appears on a desk. More often, 10 ordinary problems arrive close enough together that the owner keeps believing each one can be solved separately. Dad had taken on several fixed-price renovation jobs during a period when material costs were climbing. He had always been good at estimating. But good estimates made 6 months earlier could become bad contracts if lumber, fixtures, subcontractor rates, or specialty materials moved against you. One project had been especially painful. The homeowners changed their minds constantly, but Dad had been too proud to document every change the way he should have. He absorbed some extra labor because he wanted the finished house in his portfolio. Then a custom cabinet order had to be remade. Another project fell behind because a subcontractor failed to show. Meanwhile, 2 larger clients paid late. None of those things should have destroyed a healthy company. Together, they squeezed cash. Dad responded by doing what successful owners often convince themselves is temporary. He kept the crews. He kept bidding. He kept overhead. He expected the next good project to repair the last bad one. When that did not happen quickly enough, he used credit. The house became one of the pressure valves. I knew parts of this because he had complained about late clients. Mom had mentioned payroll being tight. Dad had asked me questions about project margin without showing me the full reports. What I had not known was how deeply the family property had become connected to the business. That distinction mattered. I was not reconstructing his books. I was reconstructing the story he had told me in pieces. A week after Ashley came to my house, she called while I was at work. I found something weird. What? Mom's checking account. I lowered my voice. How did you get into Mom's checking account? She gave me access last year when she had surgery because I was helping pay some bills. I still have view access. That is different from having permission to investigate her. I'm not investigating her. I was looking for the property tax payment she told me came out of that account. What did you find? A bunch of withdrawals. How big? She gave me a rough range. Some were several $1,000s. A few were more. My first reaction was the same as hers. Where had the money gone? But I knew enough to dislike first reactions. What do the descriptions say? Transfers. To where? I can't tell from this screen. Then you do not know what they are. Come on, Morgan. I'm serious. She was moving money out of the household account while Dad says they're struggling. That could mean a lot of things. Like what? Taxes, vendors, payroll, another account, a loan payment, or something she doesn't want anyone to know about. Yes. Ashley went silent. I could hear the temptation in her breathing. Our mother had humiliated me at my wedding. She had clearly minimized parts of the house transaction. It would have been easy for both of us to decide she had also been hiding personal spending. Easy stories are dangerous when you are angry. Don't accuse her of stealing money, I said. I didn't say stealing. You were about to. You don't know that. I know you. She laughed once. Fine. What do I do? If you legitimately still have access for the reason she gave you, look only at the transaction descriptions you already see. Do not start resetting passwords or pulling records you were not authorized to access. You really think I would hack Mom's bank account? No. I'm telling you not to turn curiosity into something stupid. You always make everything sound criminal. And yet here you are calling me? She sighed. Okay. 2 days later, the explanation arrived. Ashley called Mom and asked about one of the transfers because the property tax payment was near it. Mom answered without hesitation. The money had gone to Dad's business account. Not for a secret vacation. Not for jewelry. Not for gambling. Payroll. Another transfer had covered an urgent payment to a cabinet supplier who was threatening to stop deliveries. Another had gone toward a subcontractor balance. Ashley told me that over the phone. So she was helping him. Yes, a lot. Apparently, I sat back in my office chair. That changed something for me. Not about whether Mom had manipulated Ashley. Not about the wedding. But about her motivation. Susan was not standing outside Craig's crisis, ordering everyone else to sacrifice while protecting herself. She had already put household money into the company. That made her more understandable. And in some ways, more dangerous. People who sacrifice willingly often begin believing everyone else should sacrifice too. If Mom had already moved tens of thousands of household dollars toward payroll and vendors, then family helps family was not just a slogan to her. It was a rule she had followed, a rule she expected us to follow. Ashley said, I almost accused her of hiding money. I know. You would have loved that. No. Please. I would have loved being right about what she did at my wedding. I do not need her to be guilty of everything. Ashley was quiet. Then she said, That might be the nicest thing you've said about Mom in months. It was not a compliment. Still, I ended the call with a clearer picture of my mother than I had before. She was not inventing a crisis. She had been living inside one. She was just hiding the cost. A few days later, Dad texted Ashley that the broker needed an old property tax document and a copy of a homeowner's insurance declaration they kept in the house. Ashley asked me to go with her. I almost said no. The documents had nothing to do with me. But she sounded nervous, and Mom and Dad were both out that afternoon meeting with one of Dad's vendors. So I went. The house was quiet when we entered. Ashley unlocked the side door with the current key, not the brass one from the wedding. The ceremonial key was still in the velvet box inside her purse. Kind of ruins the symbolism, I said. She looked at me. What? Wrong key. She almost smiled. We found the folder in a cabinet near Dad's home office. Ashley sat on the floor and started sorting through property tax statements while I stood in the hallway. That was when I noticed the pantry door frame. The marks were still there. Dad had renovated almost every visible surface in the house, but he had never painted over those pencil lines. Morgan, age 8. Ashley, age 6. Morgan, age 10. Ashley, age 8. Some had dates. Some were crooked. One of Ashley's marks sat suspiciously close to mine. She came up behind me. Oh my God. You cheated on that one? I did not. You absolutely did. I had a growth spurt. You grew 3 inches between breakfast and dinner? She laughed. I remembered the day. Dad had told us to stand straight against the frame. Ashley went first, then insisted on going again after me. She rose onto her toes just enough to get closer to my mark. Dad saw her. He pretended not to. Then he drew the line where the top of her head actually was. Ashley pointed at the wall. He told me I'd catch you eventually. You never did. I'm taller than you in heels. That is not how height works. She leaned against the opposite wall. For a minute, we were not talking about mortgages. We were not talking about Mom. We were 2 sisters standing in the hallway where we had once argued over who grew faster. I had forgotten what that felt like. Ashley touched one of the pencil marks. I really wanted this house. The past tense caught my attention. Wanted? She looked toward the kitchen. I still do. I just don't know what wanting it means anymore. I did not tell her that was progress. She would have hated that. Instead, I said, then find out. She looked at me. That's it? That's it. We took the folder and left. That evening, Ashley submitted the remaining information for the formal mortgage application. She told me only after she had done it. I authorized the credit pull, she said. Okay. You sound disappointed. I'm not. I thought you wanted me to stop. I want you to understand the deal. What if I understand it and still do it? Then you do it. Ashley was quiet. You really mean that? Yes. She laughed softly. That might be even more annoying. Probably. The mortgage broker requested a few additional documents over the next several days. Income verification. Prior year tax forms. Clarification about commission income. Ashley had more than 2 years of history in medical device sales. and her recent promotion had raised her base salary. So the broker told her the income profile itself was not the main concern. That detail mattered. Her promotion had not magically turned her into a borrower overnight. She had already been strong. The promotion had made her stronger. The exact reason my parents had become more serious about the house after that remained a question, not an answer. Then the first written estimate arrived. Ashley did not call. She sent me a screenshot. The message came while I was leaving work. I stopped beside my car and opened it. The document showed the projected payment based on the current loan scenario. I read it once. Then again, the number was not impossible for Ashley. That was not the problem. It was simply nowhere close to the modest financing she had imagined when Mom handed her a brass key in front of 200 wedding guests. A second message appeared. This payment is not what Mom described. I stood in the parking garage staring at those words. For the first time, Ashley was no longer asking whether I was jealous. She was asking whether our parents had told her the truth. The written estimate did not contain a hidden catastrophe. That was the first thing I told myself when Ashley forwarded it to me. There was no secret balloon payment buried on page 12, no absurd interest rate, no clause that turned the house into some impossible trap. The numbers were simply much larger than the story she had been given. The house was still worth roughly $950,000. Mom and Dad were discussing a family sale around $800,000. The structure assumed a gift of equity of about $150,000, which was real value. But the proposed mortgage was still in the neighborhood of $650,000, and once the estimated taxes, insurance, and ordinary carrying costs were added, Ashley was looking at a monthly housing obligation far above the vague, manageable payment Mom had used before the wedding. Ashley came over that evening, with the estimate printed out and folded in half like she was annoyed at the paper itself. Nathan was out meeting a friend, so she and I sat at my dining table with 2 cups of coffee and the house numbers between us. She tapped the top line. Tell me whether I'm overreacting. I'm not going to tell you what reaction to have. She glared at me. I turned the document toward myself. I'll tell you what I see. That is what I meant. No, it isn't. She rolled her eyes. Fine. Tell me what you see. I went through the numbers slowly. The property value, the proposed sale price, the gift of equity, the mortgage amount, the estimated payment. I kept my voice neutral because the document deserved neutrality. It did not prove Mom and Dad were committing some financial crime. It did not prove they were trying to destroy Ashley. It proved that the transaction was significant enough that nobody should have presented it with a brass key and a few sentimental lines about keeping the house in the family. When I finished, Ashley stared at the monthly figure. That is not what Mom described. No. She made it sound like I'd have a small mortgage. Did she give you a number? No. Then, she gave you an impression. Ashley looked at me. That sounds like a polite way of saying she lied. It means she let you fill in the blank. That's worse. Sometimes. She leaned back and crossed her arms. Can I afford it? That depends on what you mean by afford. Oh my God. I'm serious. Can you technically qualify? Maybe. Can you make the payment? Probably. Do you want to dedicate that much of your income to one house? That is a different question. I'd have equity. Yes. A lot. Yes. So it isn't a bad deal. I didn't say it was. She stared at me, as if she had been waiting for me to attack the transaction, and was irritated that I would not cooperate. This is what I don't get about you, she said. You keep acting like something is wrong, but every time I ask whether the deal itself is bad, you say maybe not. Because those are 2 separate questions. How? The house can be valuable and the way they brought you into it can still be manipulative. Ashley looked down again. I continued. If someone gives you $150,000 in equity and asks you to take on a $650,000 mortgage, both things are true. You received something valuable. You also accepted a major obligation. She rubbed her forehead. I hate this. I know. No, you don't. I let that sit. Then she said, They made it sound like they were basically giving me the house. That is the part I would be angry about. She looked at me sharply. Would? It's your transaction. You're already angry. About my wedding. She looked away. That was the line between us. I was not going to blur. What Mom and Dad were doing with the house mattered. What Ashley had done at my reception was a different injury. At that point, I still did not know exactly how much Ashley had known about the wedding plan. I knew she had enjoyed being singled out. I knew she had accepted the key. I knew she had defended the announcement afterward. I did not yet know whether she had helped build the moment itself. Ashley folded the estimate again. I'm going to talk to them. Okay. You want to come? No. Her eyes widened. Why not? Because if I'm there, they'll spend the whole conversation talking about me. She knew I was right. They'll say you poisoned me against it. They'll say that either way. So why not come? Because I want to know what they tell you when I'm not in the room. Ashley frowned. That sounds strategic. It is. You say that like it's normal. For me, it is. She almost smiled. Then the fear came back into her face. What if they're right? About what? What if I'm making this bigger because you are? I studied her. That question irritated me more than it should have. Not because she had asked it, because I knew where it came from. Our parents had spent years turning my caution into a personality defect. If I said a contract looked dangerous, I was dramatic. If I asked for documents, I was cold. If I refused to sign something, I was selfish. By the time Ashley sat across from me with a $650,000 mortgage estimate in her hands, part of her still believed the existence of my concern was evidence that the concern itself might be exaggerated. I took a breath before answering. Then ignore me. She blinked. Read the document without my voice in your head. Compare the payment to what Mom told you. Ask where the seller proceeds go. Ask why they needed to announce it publicly before you had this estimate. Then decide whether I made it bigger. Ashley stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. She left with the papers under her arm. The confrontation with Mom and Dad happened the next night. I was not there. Ashley later told me the part she was willing to repeat, and I was careful even then not to assume I knew every word. What mattered was that the pattern held. Dad started with numbers. Mom started with emotion. According to Ashley, Dad said the mortgage amount was exactly what anyone should expect when buying a valuable house. He said the gift of equity was substantial, and that she was getting a financial advantage most people her age would never receive. He was right about that. Mom said they had spent years maintaining the property, preserving it, and making sure one of their daughters could eventually keep it. She said they could have sold to strangers. She said Ashley should feel grateful they were choosing family. Also technically true. That was what made the whole thing harder to untangle. Manipulation becomes easier when every sentence contains enough truth to survive inspection. Ashley asked why neither of them had ever told her the mortgage could be around $650,000. Dad said the number had not been final. Mom said there had been no reason to frighten her with estimates that could change. Ashley asked why the house had been announced before she saw the estimate. Mom said, because it was supposed to be a surprise. Ashley told me that was the moment she started feeling sick. Not because the answer was obviously false, because it was the exact answer she had already given herself. Ashley pressed harder. She asked where the proceeds from the sale would go. Dad said they had property obligations and business obligations. Mom said that was irrelevant to Ashley because once the house was hers, their use of their own proceeds was their business. Again, legally and mechanically, that was largely true. Emotionally, it answered a different question. Ashley had been told the house was a family gift. Now she was discovering that her purchase would also generate cash her parents intended to use elsewhere. She came to my house the next afternoon without calling first. I opened the door and knew from her face that the conversation had gone badly. She walked past me into the kitchen. They're acting like I'm ungrateful. I closed the door. What did they say? She told me. I listened. When she finished, she said, "Tell me what you think. I think they are describing the transaction accurately now." She stared at me. That's it? No. Because it sounds like you're defending them. I'm not. I'm telling you the problem changed. She looked frustrated. What does that even mean? At first, you thought you were receiving a house with a relatively small amount of financing. Now you know you are buying the house with a large mortgage while receiving real equity. That is a different deal from the one you pictured. But still a good deal. Potentially. There's that word again. Because I refuse to call a transaction bad just because I hate how they presented it. Ashley walked to the window. They keep saying I'm getting $150,000 in equity. You are, and you don't think that matters? Of course it matters. Then maybe I'm being ridiculous. I watched her. There was something almost painful about how quickly she wanted permission to go back to the original story. I understood it then. The house was not just a house. It was proof. Morgan had a career. Morgan had a stable marriage. Morgan had her own home. Morgan had said no to Dad and still built a life without needing him. Ashley had the family house. Not yet legally, but emotionally, she had already claimed it. My parents had given her a public symbol that said she was the daughter they trusted, the daughter they wanted close, the daughter who belonged. If the transaction was ugly, she did not just lose a real estate opportunity. She lost the meaning she had attached to being chosen. Ashley turned back toward me. You don't understand why this matters. I felt my shoulders tighten. I understand that it matters. No, you don't. Then tell me. She did. You already have everything. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in her face. Ashley, you do. You have a house. You have Nathan. You have a career people respect. You have money saved. You never need mom and dad for anything. You walk into a room and people listen to you because you always sound like you know what you're doing. That isn't everything. To you, maybe. She pointed toward the documents on my counter. This is the one thing they gave me that they never gave you. The words were ugly because they were honest. I said nothing. Ashley kept going. I know you don't want the house. I believe you now. But you still don't get what it means that they chose me to keep it. There was the word again. Chose. Not sold to. Not financed through. Chose. I should have recognized what she was telling me and stopped there. Instead, I let frustration outrun judgment. They didn't choose you, I said. You qualified. The sentence landed exactly as badly as it sounds. Ashley went completely still. I knew before she answered that I had crossed a line. Not because the idea was entirely wrong. Because I had taken the most painful interpretation of the evidence and thrown it at her before I could prove it. Her face closed. So that's what you think of me. That isn't what I said. It's exactly what you said. I said your borrower profile matters. You said they didn't choose me. I shouldn't have phrased it that way. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Wow. A correction from Morgan. Ashley. No. Don't. She grabbed her purse. I could have tried to stop her. I did not. She reached the door, then turned back. You think everything has an answer if you can just find the right document. That's not true. It is. You think people are numbers. Dad's debt, my credit, mom's transfers. You don't even hear yourself. That's not fair. Neither was what you just said. She left. I stood in my kitchen for several minutes after the door closed. She was right about one thing. The line had been unfair. Not because my parents' interest in her borrower profile was imaginary. By then I had enough evidence to know it mattered. But I did not yet know whether it was the reason they had elevated her at the wedding. I had taken a suspicion and spoken it like a verdict. That was the flaw in people like me. We like to think evidence makes us careful. Sometimes it makes us arrogant. When you are used to being right about systems, you start believing you are entitled to be sharp with people. I did not call Ashley that night. An apology made immediately while both of us were angry would have turned into another argument. I sent one message instead. I should not have said that the way I did. The financial question still matters. But that sentence was cruel. I'm sorry for saying it like that. She read it. She did not reply. The silence lasted 4 days. During those 4 days, Mom began rewriting the wedding. It started with my aunt. She called and asked whether I had misunderstood the cue sheet. I asked what she meant. Apparently, Mom had told several relatives that the planner had created an internal summary using shorthand that made the wording look worse than the family intended. I almost admired the speed. Susan could not deny the screen, so she changed who had written it. I called Elise. Can you send me the original email chain for the family toast? Of course, not just the attachment, the messages around it too. She hesitated. Anything connected to your reception instructions is in the event file. I can forward the thread your mother sent me. Thank you. 10 minutes later, the email arrived. I opened it at my desk. There were multiple messages. The earliest version came from Mom. She asked Elise about timing. She wanted the family toast moved slightly later, after dessert but before the final dance set. Elise replied that schedule changes required approval from me. Mom responded that it was a family surprise and asked whether the wording could simply be added to the existing toast. Elise again said she needed confirmation for significant changes. Then there was another message. Another sender, Ashley. I stared at her name. For a second, my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe Mom had copied her. Maybe Ashley had asked about something else. I opened the thread fully. Ashley had replied directly. I read her message once. Then again. She was not asking whether the house announcement was appropriate. She was helping with timing. Her message was short. If you do it during the reception, Morgan won't interrupt. She'll keep it together because everyone will be watching. Just make sure Dad gets to the house part before she takes the mic back. I sat completely still. There was no mortgage language. No financial discussion. Nothing proving Ashley knew why my parents wanted the house announcement public. But there did not need to be. The email proved something else. She had known. Not about the financing. About me. She knew my parents intended to use my wedding to elevate her. She knew I would hate it. She had helped them choose the moment because she believed I would stay composed rather than make a scene. The public nature of my wedding had not been incidental. It had been useful. I scrolled farther. Mom replied, Exactly. She won't want to ruin her own evening. Then she sent the revised wording. Beloved daughter. The bride. Only daughter. I felt something in my chest go cold. At the wedding, Ashley had looked uncomfortable after the screen came up. I had wondered whether that discomfort meant she had been surprised. Now I knew better. She had been surprised by the exposure, not by the plan. I kept reading. There was one more message from Ashley. She suggested keeping the house announcement until the end because it would make the point land. That phrase hurt more than it should have. Make the point land. I had spent the weeks after my wedding asking whether my parents were using my sister. Now I had proof that my sister had been willing to use my wedding. I downloaded the thread, saved it in the same folder as the original cue sheet. Then I printed it. I did not send it to Ashley. Not yet. I did not call Mom. I did not forward it to relatives. I did not post it. I sat with it. That evening, Nathan came home and found me at the dining table with the email chain in front of me. He put his keys down. What happened? I slid the pages toward him. He read them. His jaw tightened. Did you know? No. Did she? Yes. He looked at me. You want me to call her? No. Your parents? No. He waited. I appreciated that he did not tell me what I should feel. I looked at Ashley's message again. Morgan won't interrupt. She'll keep it together because everyone will be watching. That was what my family had learned about me. Not that I was calm. Not that I was rational. That I could be counted on to absorb the first blow quietly. They had mistaken self-control for permission. I'm not doing anything tonight, I said. Nathan pulled out the chair across from me. Okay, I need to know more about the house first. He frowned. Why? Because Ashley is going to say she didn't know what they were doing financially. She probably didn't. I know. And that matters? It matters to what they did to her. He looked at the email, but not to what she did to you. No. That distinction became important. Ashley could be both things. Manipulated by our parents. And responsible for humiliating me. Those truths did not cancel each other. A day later, Ashley finally replied to my apology. Fine. Nothing else. I almost responded. Instead, I waited. That afternoon, Mom called. I answered because I wanted to hear how far her revised story had traveled. She began without saying hello. Your aunt tells me you are still showing people that planner document. I have not shown it to anyone since the wedding. She says you told her I wrote it. You did. It was collaborative. That word caught my attention. Collaborative with whom? There was a pause. Very small. Mom recovered. With your father, with the planner. People were discussing the toast. Elise did not write the wording. That is not the point. Who else did? Mom exhaled sharply. Morgan, I am not doing another deposition with my own daughter. You called me. I called because this has gone far enough. Then stop telling people the planner wrote something you sent her. You humiliated your father. You called me the bride at my own wedding. It was a toast. You called Ashley your only daughter. We were talking about the house. That sentence does not get better when you explain it. Mom went quiet. Then she said, Ashley told me what you said to her. I knew exactly which sentence she meant. I already apologized for how I said it. She is devastated. She should be angry. At you, probably. You cannot stand that she was given something you were not. I looked at the printed email in front of me. For once, I had a response that could have ended the argument immediately. I could have read Ashley's own words back to her. I did not. Instead, I asked, do you know what her estimated mortgage is? Mom hesitated. That is between Ashley and the lender. You announced it to my wedding guests. We announced the house. Exactly. She went silent again. Then she said, you always find a way to make something ugly. I looked at the email. No, Mom. Sometimes I just find the part you left out. She hung up. The next morning, Ashley sent me another screenshot from the broker. More detail had begun filling in around the sale assumptions. The numbers were moving closer to the structure Dad and Mom had described, but the core remained the same. Real equity, large mortgage, significant seller proceeds. She added one sentence. Dad says I should focus on what I'm getting, not what they're doing with the money afterward. I read it. Then I looked at the wedding email again. The temptation to send it was strong. Instead, I wrote, those are separate questions. You should understand both. She replied, you still think this is about them using me? I stared at the screen. I could have said yes. I could have said worse. I had a document showing she had willingly helped them use me. But I was trying to learn from the mistake I had already made. So I answered, I think you should know the full transaction before you decide what it means. Ashley did not reply. That evening, I added 3 documents to the folder on my laptop. The first was the mortgage estimate, showing the obligation Ashley had never imagined when Mom placed the brass key in her hand. The second was the original cue sheet proving my parents had planned to reduce me to the bride. The third was Ashley's own email, helping them choose the exact moment they believed I would be least likely to fight back. For the first time, I was holding evidence of 2 different betrayals at once. My parents had hidden the real weight of the house from Ashley. Ashley had helped them hide the real purpose of my wedding toast from me, and I still did not know which of those truths was going to hurt her more. The more complete transaction package arrived 4 days after Ashley sent me the first mortgage estimate. By then, the question was no longer whether the house had value. It did. The question was what everyone had been quietly attaching to that value. Ashley called me from her car after work and asked if she could come over. There was none of the old edge in her voice. She sounded tired. When she arrived, she carried a thick envelope from the broker and a second folder Mom had given her, containing documents related to the proposed family sale. She set both on my dining table, sat down, and said, I need you to tell me what I'm looking at before I go back over there and say something I can't take back. I looked at the folders, but did not open them immediately. You still want the same rule? What rule? I explain. You decide. Ashley rubbed both hands over her face. Yes. Okay. The numbers were finally beginning to resemble a real transaction instead of a family announcement. The proposed sale price was around $800,000. The appraised value was expected to land near $950,000. The difference, roughly $150,000, would be treated as gift equity from my parents to Ashley. Her proposed mortgage was around $650,000. The package also reflected estimated taxes, insurance, ordinary closing costs, and enough information about the seller side to show that the house carried far more secured debt than Ashley had imagined when Mom handed her the brass key. Ashley sat beside me while I worked through the pages. Start with the simple version, she said. You'd be buying a house worth more than the price you're paying. That part I like. You should. The equity is real. She looked relieved that I said it. I pointed to the mortgage amount. This is also real. Her mouth tightened. And these are the estimated first mortgage payoff and home equity payoff. She leaned closer. The combined amount was a little over $550,000. Ashley stared at the page. That much? Yes. So when Dad said there was still some financing to clean up, he left out the scale. She sat back. I kept reading. The seller side numbers were not final, but the structure was clear enough. After paying off the secured property obligations and ordinary transaction costs, Mom and Dad would still walk away with roughly a couple $100,000 in cash. Ashley looked at that line longer than anything else. They get that? They're the sellers. I know how selling a house works. I know. Don't do that. Do what? Answer me like I'm confused about basic life. I'm not. She tapped the estimated seller proceeds. Mom never said they were getting cash out. Did she say they weren't? Ashley gave me a look. That is not the point. No, it isn't. She pushed back from the table and stood. I watched her pace once across the dining room. They made it sound like they were sacrificing everything to give me this house. They are giving up equity, $150,000, approximately, but they're still getting more than $200,000 back after the debt. Approximately. So they're not just handing me something. No, they're selling me something. Yes. She stopped pacing. Why couldn't they just say that? I had an answer. I did not give it yet. Because by then I had learned how easily a correct answer could become a weapon if I handed it to Ashley before she reached it herself. Instead I said, "Ask them." She laughed bitterly. "You already know. I know what I think. Which is, that depends on what they plan to do with the money." Ashley stared at me. There it is. What? The part you've been waiting for. I have not been waiting for anything. You think the sale is really for Dad. I think Dad already told us the sale gives him breathing room. She dropped back into the chair. I hate that phrase now. So do I. We went back to the documents. I wanted Ashley to see one thing clearly before emotion took over again. You are not getting nothing. She looked at me. This is important. They are not selling you a worthless house. You would start with substantial equity. If the mortgage fits your life, and you genuinely want the property, the transaction could still benefit you. Then why do I feel like an idiot? Because that is not how they presented it. She stared down at the brass key photograph Mom had tucked into the folder from the wedding. They told me the house was mine. They told a ballroom the house was yours. And now it turns out I have to borrow $650,000 to make that sentence true. That is a much more accurate way to describe it. She looked at me. Do you hear how insane that sounds? It sounds like a house purchase. That isn't what I mean. I knew. The damage was not in the existence of the mortgage. It was in the emotional distance between the picture they had given her and the transaction she was now seeing. At the wedding, Ashley had been handed an old key and a title, beloved daughter. Now the key came with underwriting. I pointed to the projected monthly housing cost. This is the part you need to decide based on your own life. She looked at the number again. It's high. Yes. I can probably do it. Probably. But if commissions dip, you still have the payment. And property taxes. Yes. And maintenance. Yes. She leaned back. I'd be house poor. I wouldn't use that phrase yet. But you'd have a much larger fixed housing cost than you expected. My apartment is half this. Less than half. That was unnecessary. It was math. That is your favorite excuse. Despite everything, I smiled. She did too, but only for a second. Then she said, Dad told me this house would give me security. It gives you an asset. That is not the same thing. No. She looked toward the window. I thought about the email from the planner folder sitting on my laptop in the next room. I had not shown it to her. Not yet. Ashley was already confronting one betrayal. If I dropped the wedding email on top of the mortgage package that night, she would either collapse under both truths or use one to avoid the other. I wanted her to see each thing clearly. So I stayed with the house. What happens to their $200,000? She asked. That is the next question. Dad already said some obligations. What kind? Business. How much? He didn't say. Ashley stared at the table. Then she reached for her phone. You're calling him now? Yes. You want me here? She hesitated, then nodded. She put the phone on speaker. Dad answered on the fourth ring. Ash. Hey, I have the updated package. Good. I'm looking at the seller side. His silence was tiny, but I noticed it. What about it? There's more than $200,000 in estimated cash proceeds after the property debt. Those are preliminary numbers. I know. What are you doing with the money? Dad did not answer immediately. Then he said, some of it goes toward obligations. What obligations? You know the company has had a difficult period. So business debt. Some. How much? Ashley? I'm not going through the entire balance sheet over the phone. I'm not asking for the entire balance sheet. I'm asking why the house you gave me at Morgan's wedding creates $200,000 for you. He exhaled. Because I am selling you an asset below market value. There was an edge in his voice now. You are receiving value. I am receiving proceeds. That is how a sale works. Ashley looked at me. I said nothing. She asked, why didn't you explain that before? Because there was nothing to explain until the transaction was structured. You announced it before the transaction was structured. Dad went quiet. Then he said, your mother wanted to do something special. That is not an answer. His tone hardened. You have been spending too much time with Morgan. I looked at Ashley. She closed her eyes. There it is, she said. What? Every time I ask a question you don't like, suddenly it's about Morgan. No one said that. You just did. I said she is influencing you. She showed me documents I asked her to explain. Dad laughed once. Of course she did. Ashley's hand tightened around the phone. What does that mean? It means Morgan never met a family problem she couldn't turn into a risk assessment. I almost spoke. Ashley raised one finger toward me without looking. She wanted to handle it. Il est here. Dad, what happens to the seller proceeds? His voice changed. More controlled. We reduce certain personally guaranteed obligations. We give the company room to finish projects and collect what it is owed. We stop carrying some costs. Then we make decisions from a stronger position. There it was again. Room. Not rescue. Not recovery. Room, Ashley said. So my mortgage helps the company? No. You just said the money helps the company. I said the proceeds help us reduce pressure. That sounds the same. It is not. Explain the difference. Dad paused. You get the house. We get the proceeds from selling the house. What we do with those proceeds is our decision. That was true, and I hated how useful truth was becoming to him. Ashley stared at the phone. Would you still be selling me the house if the company didn't need the money? Dad answered too quickly. Yes. She looked at me. I could see that she did not believe him. I could also see she wanted to. Dad continued. We planned for you to have that house eventually. Eventually is not now. Why are we even fighting about this? Because I didn't know I was being asked to borrow $650,000 so you could pay business obligations. You are being asked to buy a valuable house for less than it is worth. That's not what Mom said at the wedding. That wedding has become a poison pill because your sister cannot let it go. Ashley's face changed. Not toward me. Toward the phone. This conversation is not about her. Dad went silent. Ashley ended the call. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, He makes it sound so reasonable. Parts of it are reasonable. I hate when you say that. It matters. Why? Because if you tell yourself every part is a lie, you'll miss the part that actually is. She looked at me. What part is that? That this is about giving you the house. Her expression tightened. You don't believe that. I think giving you the house is part of it. And the rest? Liquidity. She looked down at the package. $200,000. Not enough to transform a seriously troubled company. Enough to postpone something. Enough to pay down selected obligations. Enough to buy time. I knew that pattern. I had seen it before. The next day, Mom called Ashley. Ashley did not put that call on speaker, so I only knew what she later told me. Susan did not discuss seller proceeds first. She discussed people. She reminded Ashley how many relatives had congratulated her, how her coworkers knew, how Dad had already told several longtime friends that the house would stay in the family, how relatives had started talking about future holidays there. According to Ashley, Mom said, Do you understand how humiliating it would be if you backed out now? That sentence did more damage than any mortgage figure. When Ashley repeated it to me that evening, I asked, "Humiliating for whom?" She looked at me. I asked her the same thing. What did she say? That everyone would think I rejected them after everything they were trying to give me. I felt something cold settle into place. There it was. The wedding announcement had created an audience. Before Ashley had seen the complete financial structure, our parents had already put her future ownership into other people's heads. Now backing out would not feel like declining a transaction. It would feel like publicly rejecting love. Mom had turned a private financial decision into a social commitment. I did not say that aloud immediately. Ashley already looked sick enough. She sat on my couch with one leg tucked under her. I told people at work. I know. I told my landlord I might not renew. That is not the same as ending the lease. No, but I told her to start planning for the unit to be available. Okay. And I put down a deposit with a designer. How much? She told me. It was painful, but not catastrophic. A few $1,000s. Refundable? Partly. Anything else? I bought a dining table. I stared at her. You bought furniture before you had a loan estimate? It was on sale. Ashley. She threw a cushion at me. I caught it. Don't. I wasn't going to say anything. You were absolutely going to say something. I was going to say the table is the least of your problems. That is not better. I put the cushion beside me. Can you cancel it? Maybe. There's a restocking fee. Then decide whether the fee is cheaper than letting a table choose a $650,000 mortgage for you. She looked at me. That was actually useful. I have my moments. She gave a tired laugh. Then her face changed again. I already acted like this was done. Yes. That's what Mom keeps using. Yes. Ashley was quiet. Then she asked, "Do you think they did that on purpose?" This time I did not answer quickly. The wedding email in my files said Ashley herself had helped choose the moment because she believed I would stay composed. But it did not mention the loan. It did not prove Mom had told Ashley everything. It did not prove Susan's financial motive. I think Mom knew public announcements are hard to walk back, I said. That is not the same as saying she planned this. No. Do you think she did? I think the timing deserves an explanation. Ashley looked disappointed. She wanted certainty. So did I. But we still did not have it. A few days later, Mom asked me to lunch. That alone was suspicious. Susan did not ask me to meals during conflict. She summoned people to the house, where she controlled the setting. I agreed because I wanted to hear what she said without Dad beside her. We met at a restaurant near her neighborhood. She arrived 7 minutes late and spent the first 5 minutes talking about nothing. Then she folded her napkin across her lap. I want you to stop frightening your sister. I am not frightening her. You are showing her every possible downside. I am showing her the documents she asks me to explain. She trusts you because of what you do for work. That sounds healthy. Mom ignored that. She has wanted that house for years. Then she should understand what owning it costs. You are obsessed with cost. No, I am obsessed with consent. Mom stared at me. That is an ugly word to use. It is a normal word. She knows she is taking a mortgage. Now, she always knew there would be financing. She thought it would be small. That is not our fault. Who gave her that impression? Mom's face hardened. This is exactly what I mean. You make every conversation adversarial. You called me to ask me to stop explaining documents. I called because Ashley is spiraling. She is asking questions. Because of you. No, because the payment is almost double what she pictured. Mom looked away. I watched her. Why announce the house before she had that number? Her eyes came back to mine. Because we wanted to give her something joyful. Why not wait? Because it was your wedding. That answer was so strange I almost missed it. What does my wedding have to do with when Ashley receives a house? Mom's expression changed. Only slightly. Then she said, "The family was together." Exactly. She went still. I did not push harder. Not yet. Mom recovered. You have made enough of this. No. I have asked questions. And now Ashley is talking about backing out. She has not told me that. She told me she needs time. That sounds reasonable. Mom leaned forward. It would devastate your father. There it was. Not Ashley. Dad. How? Because he has spent his entire life building something for this family. The house? The company. The house. All of it. I looked at her. So, the transaction is about the company. I did not say that. You keep getting there eventually. Mom sat back. Your father needs breathing room. The phrase again. I almost asked her where she learned it. Instead I said, what happens after he gets it? What? The breathing room. What is the plan? He finishes projects. Which projects? He collects receivables. How much? He reduces obligations. Which ones? Mom's mouth tightened. You are not his consultant. No. Then stop acting like one. I am not. I am asking what Ashley's mortgage accomplishes. Mom looked at me for several seconds. It gives everyone options. Options are not a plan. She reached for her purse. Lunch was over. Before she stood, she said, one day you are going to realize not every problem can be solved by asking for another spreadsheet. I looked at her. And one day, you may realize calling something family doesn't make the numbers disappear. She left before the check came. I paid my half and went back to work. That conversation stayed with me. Not because Mom had admitted anything dramatic. She had not. But because she could describe what the $200,000 would do only in verbs that postpone decisions. Finish. Collect. Reduce. Breathe. Nothing about rebuilding margins. Nothing about changing pricing. Nothing about cutting crews. Nothing about terminating bad projects. Nothing about selling equipment. Nothing about restructuring debt. Just time. I had heard that language professionally too many times. Time is useful when it leads somewhere. Time is expensive when it only delays the same decision. That evening, I opened the folder Dad had sent me 18 months earlier. I compared it with the newer language. Temporary. Breathing room. Flexibility. Different documents. Same psychology. A memory surfaced. Not from 18 months earlier. From the previous spring, Dad had emailed me a long PDF from an outside advisor and asked one narrow question about a section discussing contract margins. I had answered him, then forgotten about the file. I searched my email. Craig Wilson. Attachment. April 2025. There it was. The subject line was bland enough that I had never thought about it again. Can you explain page 12? I opened the thread. My reply was still there. A short explanation. Nothing more. Dad had thanked me. I downloaded the attachment. It was much longer than I remembered. 46 pages. I had only read the section he asked about. I started scrolling. Revenue trends. Project margin analysis. Working capital pressures. Accounts receivable. Subcontractor exposure. None of that surprised me. Then I reached a section I had never opened. The heading made me stop. Recommended wind-down scenario. I stared at it. For several seconds, I did not move. Then I looked at the date on the report. April 2025. 9 months before my wedding. 5 months before Ashley's promotion. Long before Mom stood in a ballroom and told everyone the house was going to her beloved daughter. I had spent weeks asking why my parents needed Ashley's mortgage to give Dad breathing room. The report on my screen suggested a more disturbing question. What if they had known all along that breathing room was not going to save anything? I read the report twice before I called anyone. The first time, I read it like a daughter who had just found evidence that her father had been keeping something from the family. The second time, I read it like the person Dad had once trusted enough to explain page 12. That distinction mattered. Anger made every sentence feel like an indictment. My job required me to separate what the advisor had actually written from what I wanted it to mean. The company had not been declared dead. That was important. The advisor had laid out conditions. Craig needed to stop taking certain low-margin work. He needed to reduce overhead, sell non-essential equipment, improve collections, and stop relying on short-term borrowing to cover operating gaps. The report also said that if those measures did not produce a credible restructuring path, an orderly wind-down should begin. Then I reached the section that changed everything. No additional personal or family capital should be introduced merely to extend operations in the absence of a formal restructuring plan. I read that sentence again. It did not say never accept family money under any circumstances. It did not say bankruptcy was inevitable. It said exactly what I had been asking Dad for weeks. What is the plan? The report was dated April 2025. Mom and Dad had started getting serious about the family sale months later. Ashley's promotion came after the report. My wedding came after all of it. Dad had known. Maybe not every number that existed now. Maybe not exactly how the next 9 months would unfold. But he had known that simply finding another source of money was not a strategy. I scrolled back to page 12. That was the only part Dad had asked me about. It discussed margin compression on fixed-price contracts and how delays were affecting project profitability. His email had said, "Can you explain what they mean by adjusted gross margin here? I think they're overstating the problem." I had answered that question. Nothing more. I remember feeling almost stupid when I first realized the full report had been sitting in my email for nearly a year. Then I stopped myself. It was not my company. I had not been hired to review it. Dad had not said, "Morgan, please tell me whether this business is viable." He had asked about one section. I had read the section. I had answered him. My parents had spent years teaching me that if I touched a problem, I was somehow responsible for solving it. I was not going to turn that habit against myself now. Nathan came into the room while I was still at the dining table. He looked at the open laptop. "You found something?" "Yes." "Bad?" "Depends on what Dad knew after he got it." Nathan pulled out the chair across from me. I turned the screen so he could see the date. This advisor told him 9 months before the wedding that more family money was not a substitute for restructuring. Nathan read the highlighted paragraph. "And then they tried to sell the house to Ashley." "Yes. So they ignored the report." "Maybe." He looked at me. "That doesn't sound like maybe. It is until I ask what changed afterward." Nathan sat back. "You think something could have changed enough to justify the sale?" "I think I need to give him the chance to tell me." He smiled faintly. "You really do enjoy making your own life harder." "No. I enjoy knowing which accusation I can defend later." That part was true. I did not want to call Dad and say, "You knew the company was dead." The report did not say that. I wanted to ask one question. What changed? If he had a real answer, I would listen. If he did not, that would tell me more than a dramatic confrontation ever could. I called him the next morning. He answered from his office. "What?" "No, hello." I opened the report on my second monitor. "I reread the advisory report you sent me last spring." Silence. Then, "Why?" "Because you keep saying the house transaction gives you breathing room." "So?" The report already addressed that. Dad exhaled. "Morgan, I do not have time for this." "Then answer one question." "I'm working." "What changed after April?" He went quiet. I waited. Finally he said, "What are you talking about?" The advisor said not to introduce more personal or family capital without a formal restructuring plan. They laid out a wind-down scenario if the changes didn't work. "So what changed after April?" His voice hardened. "That report was one opinion." "Okay. Consultants are paid to tell you everything that can go wrong. Sometimes, they did not understand our clients. Maybe, they did not understand the pipeline. Then what improved?" He did not answer. I asked more specifically. "Which projects replaced the lost margin?" "You are not entitled to my books." "I did not ask for your books. You are asking questions like an auditor. I am asking what changed between an advisor telling you not to add family capital and you asking Ashley to take a $650,000 mortgage so you can get liquidity out of the house. That is a dishonest way to describe the transaction. Ashley gets the house and real equity. You get seller proceeds." Which part is dishonest? The implication. What implication? That I am taking something from your sister. I did not say that. You do not have to. I leaned back in my chair. There it was again. Dad did not like the question, so he argued with a statement I had not made. I looked at the report. The advisor gave you a list. Stop certain jobs. Cut overhead. Sell equipment. Improve collections. Formal restructuring if necessary. Which of those did you do? His voice changed. You have always wanted to prove you were right about this company. I felt the old instinct to defend myself. I did not. Instead, I said, I wanted you to prove the report wrong. Silence. You didn't. Dad hung up. I stared at my phone. Not satisfying. Not dramatic. Just an ended call. But sometimes, a person hangs up because they have nothing left to say. Mom called 7 minutes later. That told me Dad had told her immediately. You had no right to ambush your father at work. I asked him what changed after the advisor report. He is under enormous pressure. I know. No, you do not. I looked at the report again. Then explain it. You think because you read one consultant's document you understand 30 years of his life. I do not. Then stop acting like you do. I understand one thing. The advisor warned against adding more family capital without a restructuring plan. Mom's breathing changed. You are twisting language. What is the plan? There are projects finishing. Which ones? Craig has receivables coming in. How much? That is none of your business. Then Ashley's mortgage should not be part of it. It is not. Then why are seller proceeds going toward business obligations? Mom snapped. Because your father has spent his entire life protecting this family. I went quiet. She heard herself too late. I said, that is not an answer. Yes, it is. No, it is a reason you think we should stop asking. You make everything sound ugly. I am asking where the money goes. Your father is trying to preserve what he built. From what? Mom did not answer. I pressed once. The numbers? Or the embarrassment of closing it? Her voice dropped. You are cruel. That word used to stop me. Not because I thought I was cruel, because I hated the possibility. My mother knew that. She had used it for years. This time I looked at the report and said, maybe. But that does not change the answer. What answer? That you still haven't told me what the money fixes. She hung up too. I sat there for several minutes. Then I wrote the dates down again. April 2025, advisor report. September 2025. Ashley's promotion. Late 2025, house, sale planning accelerates. January 2026. Public announcement at my wedding. February and March. Mortgage process. The order mattered. Dad had not received bad news after choosing Ashley. He had received bad news first. Then Ashley became more financially useful. Then the house became hers in public, before it became hers on paper. The timeline still did not prove the entire motive, but the shape of it was becoming harder to explain away. I reopened the report and read the wind-down section more carefully. The advisor had modeled what happened if Craig stopped trying to maintain the company at its old size. Sell equipment. Collect outstanding receivables. Finish only the projects worth finishing. Negotiate selected obligations. Reduce personally guaranteed exposure where possible. Preserve remaining personal assets. That last part sat with me. Preserve remaining personal assets. The house transaction would do almost exactly that. It would clear the existing secured debt at closing. It would move the property out of Mom and Dad's hands. It would give them cash. It would reduce selected obligations. It would give Dad time to exit. Not save the company. Exit. That was the moment I stopped thinking of Ashley's mortgage as rescue money. It was exit money. She was not being asked to fund the next great chapter of Dad's business. She was being asked to make the last chapter less painful for him. There was a difference. A huge one. I called Ashley. She answered after a few rings. What? I found something. That phrase has ruined my month. I know. What? I reread the advisory report Dad sent me last year. She was quiet. The one from the consultant? Yes. What does it say? It says the company had a restructuring path, but it also modeled a wind down if that failed. How long ago? April. She did not speak. I continued. It also says not to add more personal or family capital, just to extend operations without a formal restructuring plan. Ashley finally said, maybe they did restructure. I asked Dad what changed, and he told me the advisor did not understand the business. That is not an answer. No. What did Mom say? That Dad is trying to preserve what he built. Ashley went quiet again. Then she said, preserve. Yes. Not save. That is what I noticed. I heard her moving around. Maybe pacing. What are you saying? I think the house sale makes more sense as part of an exit than as part of a recovery. Silence. That is worse. It depends. Do not do that. Do what? Say depends when you know exactly what you think. I closed my eyes. She was right. I think Dad knew by last spring that the company might not survive in its current form. Did he know it would fail? No. Then say that. Fine. He knew the risk was serious enough that a professional advisor modeled winding it down. Ashley exhaled. And they still told me I was helping save the family business. Did they use the word save? She paused. Mom did. Dad? He said help. Protect. Keep things together. That distinction sounded very much like Dad. Ashley said, I need to talk to them. Not yet. The words came out too fast. She reacted immediately. You just said you weren't going to tell me what to do. I know. So? I took a breath. You should talk to them. I just think you need to see the report first. That is different. Yes. Send it. I will. I emailed her the entire PDF, not screenshots. Then I sat there staring at the planner folder on my laptop. I had been avoiding the other piece. Ashley had a right to know what Dad knew before the wedding. She also had a right to know that I knew what she had done during the wedding planning. Those two conversations could not stay separate forever. But I did not want to combine them in a text message. I wanted her to read the report before she had to defend herself to me. That evening, she called again. Her voice was flatter. I read it. All of it? Yes. What do you think? I think Dad would say the advisor was wrong. He already did. I think Mom would say Dad was fighting for us. She did. Ashley laughed once. Not happily. So everyone has their lines. I did not respond. Then she asked, Did you know about the wind down section before now? No. You never read it? No. Why not? Because Dad asked me about page 12. I answered page 12. She was quiet. That sounds stupid. Maybe. No, I mean him. Why send you the whole report and only ask about one page? I wondered the same thing. Maybe he forgot what else was in it. Maybe. You don't believe that. I do not know. Ashley sighed. I hate this. I know. No. I mean, I hate that every answer creates another question. That was exactly how I felt. She said, If they knew more family money was not supposed to fix this, then what did they want from me? I looked at the report. Time. For what? To close it on better terms. Ashley stopped breathing for a second. Then she said, You think I was supposed to make the company easier to bury? That is not how I would say it. How would you say it? I think your transaction could reduce the damage to them if the company winds down. That is the same thing with softer words. It matters how we say things. Since when? That hurt because I deserved it. I let it pass. Ashley said, I'm going to ask them tomorrow. I know. You still think I should read something else first? I looked at the wedding email chain. Yes. She went quiet. What? I have something about the wedding. Her voice changed. What about it? I hesitated. Not because I was afraid. Because once I showed her, whatever remained between us would change. I asked Elise for the original planner correspondence after Mom started telling relatives the cue sheet was misunderstood. And? Your email was in the thread. Long silence. Ashley did not pretend not to understand. What did you see? I looked at the message again. Morgan won't interrupt. She'll keep it together because everyone will be watching. All of it. Ashley did not speak. I continued. I am not doing this over the phone. Morgan. No. You already know. Yes. What do you want me to say? Nothing yet. She made a frustrated sound. You call me with a report that says Dad knew the company might need to wind down. Then you tell me you found my email, and now you want to wait? I want you to see both things in front of you. You're trying to control the conversation. The accusation landed. I considered it. Maybe I was. So I changed course. If you want the email now, I'll send it. Silence. Then Ashley said, No. I waited. She took a breath. Tomorrow? Okay. Somewhere neutral. Okay. And don't bring Nathan. I wasn't going to. Don't bring Mom and Dad. I definitely wasn't going to. Another long silence. Then she said, I want to see what Dad knew before the wedding. You will. And after that? She stopped. I knew what came next. After that, she had to look at what she knew too. I opened a new message. I typed, I need to show you what Dad knew before the wedding. And after that, I need to show you what I know about the wedding itself. I sent it anyway. The message sat there between us. 2 different betrayals. 2 different kinds of evidence. And for the first time, neither of us could keep pretending only one sister had been used. Ashley chose a coffee shop 20 minutes from both of our houses, far enough from Mom and Dad's neighborhood that we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. She arrived before me and had already claimed a table in the back corner. There were 2 drinks in front of her. One was hers. The other was what I always ordered. I noticed that immediately, and hated that I noticed it, because small signs of familiarity felt dangerous when I was carrying 3 documents that could change what was left of our relationship. I sat across from her and put the folder on the table. Ashley looked at it. Which one first? The report. She nodded. I slid the restructuring advisor's report toward her, already marked at the relevant pages. You've read it once, I said. Read these sections again. You think I didn't understand them? I think the order matters. She opened the report. I watched her read the date. April 2025. Then the section about margin pressure. Then the recommendation to stop certain new work. Then the warning against introducing more personal or family capital without a formal restructuring plan. Finally, the wind-down scenario. Ashley read more slowly the second time. When she reached the line about selling equipment and reducing personally guaranteed exposure, she looked up. So Dad knew. He knew the advisor thought the situation was serious. That is not what I asked. I held her gaze. He knew enough that an outside professional had already modeled what shutting down could look like. Ashley tapped the page. Before my promotion. Yes. Before they started getting serious about the house. Yes. Before your wedding. Yes. She sat back. The coffee shop was busy enough that nobody near us was listening, but Ashley still lowered her voice. So why tell me I was helping save something? I don't remember Dad using that exact word. Mom did. I know. What did he say? Protect. Keep things together. Give everyone breathing room. Ashley gave a short, bitter laugh. He really does choose his words. Yes. She looked back at the report. Could the advisor have been wrong? Of course. Her eyes lifted sharply. That easy? Yes. Advisors can be wrong. Businesses recover. New projects can improve margins. Receivables can come in. Costs can change. So maybe Dad honestly believed he could turn it around. Maybe. Ashley stared at me. You don't. I think if that happened, he should be able to show what changed. And he can't. He hasn't. Ashley folded her arms. That sounds like no. It sounds like what I said. She gave me a tired look. This is exactly why people want to shake you. I've heard. For a moment, neither of us touched the other documents. Then Ashley said, Show me the old email. I pulled out the printout from July 2024. Dad's subject line was still there. Temporary structure. I turned it toward her. This is what he sent me before he ever talked to you about the house. Ashley read the first page. Her expression changed slowly. The email itself was not dramatic. That was what made it useful. Dad asked me to review a financing structure and said my participation would strengthen the application. He described the business problem as temporary. He said the family needed flexibility. Ashley read it twice. He wanted you in this before me. He wanted my financial profile involved. That's what I said. Yes. She kept reading. Then she looked at the date again. 18 months before the wedding. Roughly. What did Mom say when you refused? That family should help family. Ashley's mouth tightened. What did Dad say? That I thought I was smarter than everyone because I worked with numbers. She looked away. I could see old memories rearranging themselves behind her face. Every Thanksgiving joke. Every comment about me being cold. Every time she had been told I cared less. Ashley looked back at the email. So I was plan B. I shook my head. I don't know that. She stared at me. Come on. I know he asked me first. I know later they built a house transaction around your borrower profile. I do not know that one was literally a backup plan for the other. That's exactly what it looks like. It does. Then why won't you say it? Because looking like something and proving it are not the same thing. Ashley leaned forward. If you had signed this, would they still have given me the house? There it was. The question beneath everything else. I could have answered with what I believed. I did not. I don't know. She looked almost angry. You must have an opinion. I do. What is it? You deserve to ask them. That is such a cowardly answer. No, it is the only honest one. Ashley pushed the email away. You think they never chose me. I think they loved what your agreement could do for them. Her face hardened. That is not the same thing. I know. Do you? Yes. She stared at me for a few seconds. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. What else is in the folder? I reached for the wedding email chain. Ashley went still. I did not slide it over immediately. I want to be clear before you read this. Her jaw tightened. I know what I wrote. I'm not sure you know what it looked like from my side. I said I know what I wrote. Then read it. I pushed the pages across the table. Ashley did not touch them at first. Finally, she picked them up. Her own email appeared halfway down the thread. If you do it during the reception, Morgan won't interrupt. She'll keep it together because everyone will be watching. Just make sure Dad gets to the house part before she takes the mic back. Ashley closed her eyes. She already knew. That was obvious. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. The end of uncertainty. I didn't know about the mortgage, she said. I know. I didn't know they needed the proceeds for Dad's company. I know. I thought they were really giving me the house. I know. Ashley looked at me. Then why are you looking at me like that? Because none of those things are what this email is about. She put the paper down. I'm telling you I didn't know what they were doing. To you. She flinched. I leaned forward. You didn't know what they were doing to you. You knew exactly what you were doing to me. Ashley looked away. I let the silence stay. For weeks, she had been able to stand in two different stories, depending on which one hurt less. In one story, Mom and Dad were using her. In the other, my wedding had just been a badly handled family surprise. The email destroyed the second story. Ashley rubbed her thumb along the edge of the paper. I knew you'd hate it. Yes. I didn't think it would go that far. What did you think calling you their beloved daughter and me the bride was supposed to do? She looked at me. I thought Mom would make it less obvious. I laughed once, because the answer was so absurdly honest. Ashley's eyes filled, but she did not cry. I know how that sounds. It sounds exactly like what happened. I wanted one thing. I said nothing. She continued. You always had everything first. That is not true. Let me finish. I did. You had the grades. You had the better internships. You knew what you wanted to do. You bought your place before I even knew whether I wanted to stay in Ohio. Then Nathan. Then the wedding. Every time Mom and Dad talked about you, even when they were complaining about you, there was always this thing underneath it. Morgan can handle herself. Morgan doesn't need anything. I watched her carefully. And you did? Yes. The word came fast. I needed something that was mine. The house. The fact that they chose me for it. There it was. Not square footage. Not market value. Selection. Ashley looked down at the email. I knew the toast would hurt you. My throat tightened. Thank you for finally saying that. I told myself it would be one moment. At my wedding. I know. You told Mom I wouldn't stop it because I'd stay composed. I know. You used the fact that I would not blow up my own reception against me. Ashley's face crumpled slightly. Yes. That single word mattered more than an elaborate apology. No excuses. Not yet. I sat back. Ashley rubbed her eyes. I wanted everyone to see them pick me. I did not soften it for her. You got what you wanted. She looked at me. For about 10 minutes. That does not make it better. I know. Do you? Yes. I believed she believed it in that moment. That was not the same as forgiveness. Ashley reached for her coffee, then stopped because her hand was shaking. I'm sorry. I heard it. I did not rescue her from the silence after it. Finally, I said, I believe you're sorry. Her eyes lifted. That's it? For now. She nodded. That hurt her. It was supposed to. Not as punishment. As reality. Apologies did not erase planning. They did not erase the ballroom. They did not erase the fact that Ashley had decided my self-control made me safe to humiliate. She looked back at Dad's old email. So what now? That depends on you. I know you hate that answer. I hate all of your answers. Consistent, at least. She almost smiled. Then she became serious again. What would you do? I knew she was not asking about the wedding anymore. She was asking about the house. The mortgage. Mo and Dad. The company. Everything. Months earlier, I would have given her a list. Do not sign. Demand full numbers. Make them explain the business. Walk away. I could have built the case for her in 5 minutes. Instead, I thought about what she had accused me of. You think everything has an answer if you can find the right document. Maybe that was why I had kept trying to give everyone conclusions instead of choices. I placed my hand flat on the folder. I already made my decision. Ashley frowned. What? Dad asked me 18 months ago. You said no. Yes. That's not helpful. It is the only answer I have that belongs to me. She stared. If I were you, you're not. Ashley went quiet. I continued. You have the mortgage numbers. You have the house structure. You have the advisor report. You know Dad asked me for financial help before this. You know what they told you and what they did not tell you. Make your decision. She looked down. What if I make the wrong one? You probably will at some point in your life. That is comforting. You asked. She sighed. I leaned back. I'm not going to tell you what to sign. If you walk away because I ordered you to, Mom and Dad will make me the reason. If you sign because I tell you the house is still valuable, you'll make me responsible if you regret it. So you're protecting yourself. Yes. She looked surprised. Also you. Ashley sat with that. After a while she said, I want to ask them myself. Good. What do I ask? I shook my head. She laughed in disbelief. Seriously? You already know. She looked at the report again. Then at Dad's email. Then at her own. Slowly, she began listing the questions without my help. What changed after the advisor report? I nodded. How does my mortgage actually help the company? I nodded again. Why announce the house before I had the full numbers? Yes. Ashley's voice dropped. And if you had said yes 18 months ago, would they still have needed me? I did not answer. She did not expect me to. She gathered the documents into one stack. Then she stopped. One more. What? Why did Mom make the wedding part public? I looked at her. You already know what she told you. To keep the house in the family. No. Why the wedding? Ashley understood. She pulled out her phone. You're calling them now? Mom. You want me here? No. I stayed where I was. Ashley stood and walked a few feet away, but she did not leave the coffee shop. Susan answered quickly. I could hear only Ashley's side. Mom, I need you and Dad at the house tomorrow. Pause. No. This is not about Morgan. Longer pause. Ashley looked at me. Actually, that's exactly why I'm calling. I want answers that don't start with her name. She listened. Then her expression changed. No, I'm not signing anything tomorrow. Another pause. I said I'm not signing anything until we talk. Susan was speaking long enough that Ashley eventually closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Bring the real business plan. Pause. Not the wedding version. She ended the call before Mom could answer. Ashley came back to the table and picked up the folder. For the first time since my wedding, she was not asking me to tell her whether our parents loved her. She was asking them to prove what their love was going to cost. Ashley chose the family house for the meeting because she said she wanted Mom and Dad to answer questions in the place they kept calling her future. I understood the logic. I also understood the risk. That house carried too much meaning for all of us. Mom had turned it into proof of love. Dad had turned it into collateral. Ashley had turned it into evidence that she had been chosen. I had spent years trying not to let it become evidence of anything about me. Still, when I walked through the front door that Saturday afternoon and saw the brass key sitting in its velvet box on the kitchen table, I knew Ashley had put it there on purpose. Nathan did not come. I had asked him to stay home, and he had agreed without argument. This was not because I wanted to face my parents alone. Ashley was there, and more importantly, the meeting was not mine to control. She had called it. She had the mortgage documents. She had the advisor report. She had Dad's old email to me. She had her own email from the wedding thread. For the first time, she was walking into a family confrontation with the information arranged in front of her, instead of waiting for Mom to explain what it all meant. Dad was already angry when I arrived. He stood by the sink with his arms folded. Mom sat at the table. Ashley was across from her with the documents stacked in front of her. No one offered coffee. That told me plenty. Dad looked at me first. "Of course you're here," Ashley answered before I could. "I asked her to come." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because every time I ask a question, you tell me Morgan put it in my head." Dad's jaw tightened. Mom tried a softer approach. "Ashley, no one is attacking you." "I didn't say anyone was." "You sound upset." "I am upset." Mom glanced at me. Ashley saw it. "Stop." Susan blinked. "Excuse me? Stop looking at Morgan every time I say something you don't like." The room went still. Mom folded her hands in front of her. "Fine." Ashley opened the advisor report. "I want to start here." Dad did not sit. "What about it?" "This report is dated April." "Yes. Before my promotion." "Yes. Before you started pushing the house plan." "We were not pushing anything." Ashley ignored that. "Before the wedding." Dad said nothing. Ashley tapped the page. "It says you were supposed to stop taking certain work, reduce overhead, sell equipment, improve collections, and consider an orderly wind-down if things did not improve." It says consider. I can read. Then read the whole thing. I did. Dad's eyes flicked toward me. There it was. Ashley saw that too. "No," she said. "Don't do that." "Do what?" Look at her like she fed me the lines. Dad laughed without humor. "She did. I read the report myself. Because she dug it out. Because you sent it to her." He opened his mouth. Ashley did not let him. "What changed after April?" Dad stared at her. "What do you mean?" "The advisor said more family capital should not be used just to keep the company going without a real restructuring plan." "So what changed after April?" Dad's voice hardened. "Real life changed. That is not an answer. Clients paid. Other clients didn't. Jobs moved. Costs moved. It's a business, Ashley, not a school project." "What improved enough to make my mortgage a good way to help the company?" Dad stepped away from the sink. "Your mortgage does not help the company." Ashley pushed the transaction package forward. "The seller proceeds do. That is our money. After I borrow $650,000. You are buying a house worth more than you are paying." "I know." "Then what exactly are you accusing us of?" Ashley inhaled slowly. "I'm not accusing you of stealing from me." Mom jumped in. "Then why are we doing this?" "Because you made it sound like you were giving me a house when you were also using the sale to get cash out." Susan's face tightened. "We are giving you equity." "I know. Substantial equity." "I know." "Then why are you acting cheated?" Ashley looked at her for a long time. "Because you keep answering what I'm getting instead of why you needed me to do it now." Mom looked toward Dad. He looked back at her. That exchange lasted less than a second. It was enough. Ashley leaned forward. "If the company was doing fine, would you still be selling me this house right now?" Dad answered first. "Yes." Too fast. Ashley's expression changed. "Okay." Dad frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't believe you." Mom said. "Ashley." "No. I asked a simple question." Dad took a step toward the table. "You want to know why now?" "Because you're established. You have a good career. You can afford it. We are getting older. The house should stay in the family." Ashley nodded slowly. "So why did you ask Morgan for financial help first?" Dad went still. Mom looked at me again. Ashley's palm hit the table. "Stop looking at her." Susan's eyes snapped back to Ashley. Ashley pulled Dad's old email from the folder. "This is 18 months before the wedding." Dad said, "That was different." "How?" "It was for the company." "And mine isn't?" "You are buying property, with proceeds that help you reduce business obligations." Dad's face reddened. "You are twisting this into something it is not." Ashley looked down at the email. If Morgan had said yes, would you still have needed me to buy the house? No one answered. She looked at Mom. Would you? Susan's mouth opened, then closed. Dad said, "That question is childish." Ashley looked at him. Why? Because you are turning family decisions into some competition between you and your sister. For once, I almost admired the audacity. Ashley actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because the accusation was too perfect. You called me your beloved daughter at her wedding. Dad's face changed. Mom said, "That was a toast." You called her the bride. Susan looked away. Ashley kept going. You announced the house to 200 people before I had seen the mortgage. It was supposed to be joyful, Mom said. You made it public, because the family was together, so I'd be committed. Mom's face tightened. That is ridiculous. Is it? Yes. Then why did you keep reminding me how embarrassing it would be to back out after everyone congratulated me? Susan looked at me. Again, Ashley's voice sharpened. Answer me. Mom looked back at her. I reminded you because you were panicking. After I saw the numbers, you were overreacting. To a $650,000 mortgage? To your sister making you think you were being used. Ashley sat back. For a moment she looked almost calm. Then she asked the question that I knew had been sitting inside her since the coffee shop. Was I your beloved daughter before Morgan said no? Mom stared at her. Dad's expression hardened. That is enough. No, Ashley. No, I want an answer. Dad stepped closer. You are 32 years old. Stop acting like a child. Ashley's eyes did not leave his. Was I? He said nothing. She asked again. Was I your beloved daughter before she refused to help you? Dad's patience broke. Then act like one. The room went silent. Ashley's face changed so completely that I knew the sentence had done more than any report, mortgage estimate, or email ever could. She had spent years believing beloved daughter was a description. Dad had just revealed it as an instruction. Act like one. Do what we need. Do not question. Do not make us explain. Do not become Morgan. Ashley looked at him for several seconds. Then she closed the transaction folder. I'm not signing. Mom stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. Do not be ridiculous. I'm not buying the house. Susan looked stunned. Dad stared at Ashley, as if she had spoken in another language. You don't understand what you're saying. I do. You will lose $150,000 in equity. I know. You will lose the house. I know. You already told people. I know. Mom's voice rose. What about your deposit, your lease, everything you've planned? I'll deal with it. Susan looked at me. I knew what was coming before she said my name. Morgan. No. She blinked. I haven't even asked you anything. You were about to. Dad turned toward me. His anger shifted so quickly it almost felt physical. You did this. I stayed seated. No. You fed her every possible reason to panic. I gave her documents. You turned my own daughter against me. Ashley spoke. I am also your daughter. Dad ignored her. He looked at me. Fine. You want to be responsible? Be responsible. I knew that tone. It was the same one he had used 18 months earlier. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. There are other ways to handle this. I said nothing. We do not have to sell the house to Ashley. I know. You know people. There it was. Dad, you work with restructuring firms, lenders, private capital. You know how this works. I do. We need a bridge. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because after months of denying that Ashley's transaction was about the company, he had taken less than 30 seconds to turn toward me once she said no. Mom sat back down slowly. Dad continued, not $650,000. Nothing like that. Enough to finish the right projects. Enough to give us time to collect receivables. You could introduce me to someone. You could participate in a secured note. There are options. I looked at him. 18 months ago you asked me for almost the same thing. This is different. How? We know more now. Yes. He hesitated. I let him hear what he had just admitted. I said, the advisor told you more family capital wasn't a plan. I am not asking for charity. I know. I am offering terms. No. His eyes narrowed. You have not even heard them. I gave you my answer 18 months ago. Morgan. No. Mom leaned forward. If you cared about this family at all. I turned toward her. That sentence is exactly why I'm saying no. She stared at me. Dad's face went cold. I can make the wedding right. That surprised me. Not because I wanted it. Because I realized he thought it was a bargaining chip. What? I can talk to people. Your mother can correct the misunderstanding. We can tell everyone the toast was handled badly. We can make sure no one thinks. I held up one hand. You cannot trade me an apology for financing. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you said. He leaned back. You always have to make everything sound cheap. No. Sometimes you tell me the price. Ashley looked down. Mom's face had gone pale with anger. She turned to Ashley. You are going to regret this. Ashley's voice was quiet. Maybe. You are throwing away the house because Morgan made you afraid. No. That is exactly what happened. Ashley looked at her. I read the documents. You never cared about documents before. I do now. Susan's mouth tightened. You were happy until she got involved. Ashley's eyes filled, but her voice did not shake. I was happy because I didn't understand what you were asking. Mom inhaled sharply. We were protecting this family. Ashley looked at her. Did you know I might back out once I saw the full numbers? That was the moment. Susan stopped. For 1 second. All the arguments disappeared from her face. She looked tired. Older. I thought she might finally say yes. Or I'm sorry. Or we should have told you sooner. Something honest. Dad spoke first. We did what we had to do. Susan looked at him. Then she looked back at Ashley. The softness disappeared. Yes. She straightened. We were protecting this family. There it was. A choice. Not ignorance. Not confusion. Choice. Ashley stood. I'm done. Mom stood too. Ashley. Sit down. No. You cannot just walk away from this. I can walk away from a house I have not bought. Susan looked at me. This is what you wanted. I stood slowly. No. You wanted her to reject us. I wanted both of you to stop treating questions like betrayal. Dad laughed bitterly. You got your victory. I looked around the kitchen. The brass key. The transaction folder. The advisor report. My father red-faced beside the sink. My mother defending the same plan even after Ashley told her exactly what it had cost. It did not feel like victory. It felt like something finally breaking because it had been under pressure too long. Ashley picked up her purse. She left the key. I followed her to the door but did not go with her. She looked at me. I'm going home. Okay. I'm calling the broker Monday. Okay. You think I'm making the right decision? I almost answered. Then I stopped. You're making your decision. She stared at me, then nodded. That mattered. By the time I got home, I had 2 missed calls from Mom. I ignored them. The email arrived just after 9 that night. The subject line was, You should be ashamed. I almost deleted it unread. Then I remembered who my mother was. I opened it. The message was several paragraphs long. Most of it was exactly what I expected. I had poisoned Ashley against them. I had used my career to frighten her. I had humiliated Dad at the wedding and was now destroying his business. Then I reached the part that made me sit up. Mom wrote that if I had helped Dad when he first came to me, none of the wedding drama would ever have been necessary. I read the line again. Necessary. She continued. They had needed Ashley committed to keeping the house in the family before she saw paperwork that could make her panic. She said they had already announced the plan publicly because everyone needed to understand the decision had been made. Then she accused me of undoing that commitment because I could not stand not being in control. I read the message twice. It was not a confession. Not by itself. She never wrote, We tricked Ashley. She never wrote, We used your wedding as financial leverage. But combined with everything else, it connected the pieces. My refusal. The wedding announcement. Ashley's emotional commitment. The fear that paperwork would change her mind. The transaction. The company. 1 minute later, another email appeared in the same thread. Dad. 4 words. Stop discussing this over email. I stared at the screen. Then I saved both messages. I forwarded them to a private folder. I printed them. and I sent the chain to Ashley. Nothing else. No explanation. She called 5 minutes later. Her voice was quiet. She knew. Yes, she knew I might back out. That is what the email suggests. She wanted me committed first. Yes. Ashley stopped speaking. I waited. Finally, she said, I'm withdrawing. Okay. I'm emailing the broker tonight. Okay. You're not going to tell me to wait? No. She let out a breath. Mom says you sabotaged the deal. I never contacted your lender. I know. If she keeps saying that, I'll document it. Ashley was quiet. Then she said, I'm sorry. For what? For making it easier for them to do the same thing to you at the wedding. I closed my eyes. We'll deal with us later. Okay. She ended the call. The next morning, she formally told the broker she was not proceeding. Mom threatened in a text to tell relatives I had interfered with Ashley's financing. I did not argue. I sent the messages and relevant documents to an attorney I had used before for a routine contract matter. The response that went back was short. I was not a party to the transaction. I had not contacted the lender. I had not directed underwriting. Ashley had made her own decision. Mom stopped making that threat. 3 days later, Dad called me. I expected another request for money. Instead, he said, Do you know anyone who buys used construction equipment? I was silent for a second. He sounded different. Not humble. Not apologetic. Just tired. What kind? Skid steers, trailers, some specialty tools. I know 2 legitimate auction contacts. Send them. I will. There was a pause. Then Dad said, Don't mistake this for you being right. I looked out my office window. I don't need to. He hung up. I sent him the contacts. That was the moment I knew the fight to save the company was over. For the first time, my father was no longer asking how to keep everything standing. He was asking how to start taking it apart. By the time Dad called me about selling equipment, the company had stopped pretending it was expanding. The change was quieter than I expected. There was no dramatic announcement. No morning when employees arrived to lock doors. No single meeting where Dad admitted that the business carrying his name for almost 30 years was finished. It happened in pieces. He stopped bidding on certain renovation jobs. One of his project managers accepted an offer from another company. 2 trailers disappeared from the yard behind the office. Then one of the branded vans was sold. A skid steer went to auction. The receptionist who had worked for Dad for nearly 12 years found a job with a roofing company and posted a polite goodbye online that never mentioned why she was leaving. Dad completed the projects that still made financial sense, negotiated his way out of others, pushed harder on old receivables, and began selling equipment that had once represented growth. By August, the company was not legally dissolved. There were still contracts being closed, accounts being settled, and obligations being negotiated. But normal operations were over. It was a wind-down, exactly the outcome the advisor had modeled months before my wedding. I helped Dad once. I sent him the 2 legitimate equipment auction contacts I had promised. That was it. I did not call lenders for him. I did not introduce him to private investors. I did not review every contract or help him restructure his remaining obligations. I did not use my career to locate one last clever source of capital. A younger version of me might have convinced herself that there was a difference between lending Dad money and donating professional labor that could save him tens of thousands of dollars. I understood the distinction better by then. Rescue did not stop being rescue just because the currency changed. After I sent the contacts, I expected another request. It never came. Maybe Dad had finally accepted that my answer would not change. Maybe his pride simply would not allow him to ask again. Either explanation worked for me. Mom handled the collapse differently. Susan could lose control of a transaction and still fight desperately for control of the story around it. Once Ashley formally withdrew from the family sale, Mom began telling relatives that she and Dad had decided to downsize. She said the house had become too much to maintain. She said both daughters were established now and there was no reason for 2 people to live in a property that large. She said they wanted a simpler life. Every statement contained enough truth to survive a casual question. The house was large. They were getting older. Ashley and I were established. What Mom never said was that she had announced in front of my wedding guests that the house was going to Ashley, or that Ashley had walked away once she understood the transaction and the company behind it. Unfortunately for Mom, too many people had been at my reception. The questions began almost immediately after the house was listed. One cousin texted Ashley to ask whether the renovation plans had changed. A coworker asked why she was still renewing her apartment lease if she was moving into her parents' house. One of Mom's neighbors stopped Ashley at a grocery store and said she had been looking forward to seeing what Ashley did with the kitchen. Months earlier, Ashley would have protected Mom automatically. She would have said there had been a timing issue or blamed the lender or told people Dad had found a better financial option. Instead, she started using one sentence. The sale didn't happen. When people asked why, she said, "It wasn't the right transaction for me." No accusations. No speech about manipulation. No attempt to embarrass anyone. She simply stopped helping Mom maintain the version of events Mom preferred. That bothered Susan more than a public attack would have. She called me one afternoon and said, "Your sister is telling people things." I was sitting at my desk at work. "What things?" "That the house sale fell through." "It did. You know what I mean." "No, actually. She makes it sound like something was wrong." "What exactly is she saying?" Mom hesitated. "That it wasn't the right transaction." I almost smiled. That sounds accurate. There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathing change. "You enjoy this." "No. You always say that. Because you keep confusing me, not rescuing you, with me enjoying what happened." Mom hung up. Months earlier, I would have called back. I would have tried to make her understand the difference. By then, I knew better. Susan did not lack information. She disliked what the information required her to admit. The house sold faster than I expected, though not instantly and not for some ridiculous miracle price. The Columbus market was solid, the neighborhood was desirable, and Dad had spent years maintaining the property. They accepted an offer in July. By the time the closing approached, the home no longer looked like the place Ashley and I had grown up. Rugs had been rolled. Art was gone. Boxes lined the hallway. The dining room echoed. The kitchen counters were mostly bare, except for a stack of closing papers and the old velvet box that had once held the brass key. That was the day the beginning of this story finally caught up with me. Ashley asked me to meet her there because Mom wanted both of us to take anything sentimental before the final move. I almost declined. I had already taken the photographs and childhood things I cared about years earlier. Then Ashley said, "The pantry marks are still there." So I went. Dad was standing in the kitchen when I arrived. He had lost weight. Not enough to make him look sick, just enough to sharpen his face and make his clothes hang differently. Ashley was near the pantry doorframe. The old brass key sat on the counter. Mom was upstairs. Dad looked at me for several seconds. "Happy now?" The question was exactly how I remembered it when I later decided where to begin telling this story. Months earlier, I would have defended myself immediately. I would have told him I had not caused the company's margin problems. I would have reminded him that the restructuring advisor had warned him long before Ashley's mortgage application. I would have explained that I never contacted her lender, never forced her to withdraw, never sabotaged a closing. I would have built a perfect case for why none of this belonged to me. I did not need to anymore. "No," I said, "but I'm not fixing it either." Dad stared at me. For once, he did not argue. He nodded once, not because he agreed, but because there was nothing left to negotiate. Ashley was tracing one of the pencil marks on the pantry frame. Dad had renovated almost every visible part of the house over the years, but he had never painted over those lines. Some had dates beside them. Some had our ages. Morgan, 8. Ashley, 6. Morgan, 10. Ashley, 8. One of Ashley's lines sat suspiciously close to mine. She pointed at it. "I cheated on this one." I looked at her. "You finally admit it." I stood on my toes. "I know." Dad knew too. From across the kitchen, Dad said, "I did not." Ashley turned toward him. "You made me step away and then drew the real line lower." Dad almost smiled. "You were obvious." For a few seconds, the room became something else. I remembered Dad crouched beside us with a pencil. I remembered Ashley trying to stretch her neck. I remembered Mom yelling from the kitchen that we were going to be late for dinner. The memory hurt more than I expected because it was ordinary. That was the problem with deciding someone had become harmful. It did not erase every morning they packed your lunch, or every ride home, or every stupid childhood joke. My parents had not been monsters every day of my life. Ashley had not always been my rival. There had once been a house where two little girls competed over pencil marks because being taller seemed like the only kind of winning that mattered. I did not need to destroy those memories to hold my parents accountable for what came later. Mom came downstairs carrying a box of framed photographs and set it on the counter. She looked at the pantry marks, then at me. You should take something. I already have what I want. The dining table? No. The china? No. That silver serving set from Grandma? I don't use it. Mom's mouth tightened. You don't have to reject everything just to make a point. I'm not making a point. You always are. I let that go. Ashley picked up a small framed photograph from the box. It showed the two of us in the backyard, maybe 10 and 8, both muddy and laughing. She put it into her purse. Mom watched her. That one? Ashley nodded. Yeah. Mom looked surprised, as though she had expected Ashley to claim furniture or heirlooms simply because they were available. Then Susan noticed the velvet box on the counter. She picked it up. The brass key lay inside. She looked at Ashley first. You should keep this. Ashley's expression changed. For what? It's the house key. It hasn't opened the house in years. You know what I mean. Ashley looked at me. Mom followed her eyes. Then she walked toward me and held out the box. You might as well take it. I stared at the key. At my wedding, that piece of brass had been presented to Ashley like a crown. It had represented belonging, selection, the family home. Mom had used it to make one daughter look chosen while the other stood beside an empty microphone. Now the house belonged to neither of us, and she was offering the key to me like a consolation prize. Why? Mom blinked. Because it's part of the family. It's an old key. It means something. To you. She pushed the box closer. You were the one so upset about the house. I felt something inside me settle. I was never upset because I wanted the house. Mom's face hardened. You certainly acted like it. I was upset because at my wedding, you called Ashley your beloved daughter and called me the bride. We have been over this. No, you have explained it repeatedly. That isn't the same thing. It was a toast. You called her your only daughter. We were talking about who would get the house. That still doesn't make me stop being your daughter. Mom looked away. For a second, I wondered if she was ashamed. Then she said, You always insist on interpreting everything in the most hurtful possible way. There it was. The reflex. Even after the house sale. Even after her own email. Even after Ashley walked away. Susan still needed my pain to be a problem of interpretation rather than consequence. I looked at the key again. That was never what I wanted. Her hand lowered. Ashley stepped forward and took the velvet box from Mom. For a moment, I thought she was going to keep it. Instead, she placed it back on the counter. The agent can handle the keys. Mom stared at her. You don't want it either? Ashley looked around the empty kitchen. No. That answer hit Mom harder than mine because Ashley had wanted it. Mom knew that. The daughter who had once accepted the key in front of 200 people was leaving it on a counter because the symbol no longer worked. Ashley turned toward the pantry. I'm taking a picture of the marks. Mom looked almost offended. That's it? Ashley lifted her phone. That's enough. Dad walked outside before the conversation could turn into another argument. Mom picked up her box and followed a few minutes later. Ashley and I stayed. She photographed the doorframe. I did too. Then she leaned against the wall and said, I still hate that they sold it. I know. I almost wish I didn't. You grew up here. That's not why. I waited. She looked toward the kitchen. I hate that part of me still wants them to have given it to me the way I thought they were giving it to me. That was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. That makes sense. I don't want it now. I know. But I wanted what I thought it meant. I understood that better than I wanted to. For Ashley, the house had never only meant equity. It meant Mom and Dad chose me. For me, the wedding humiliation had never only meant a bad toast. It meant they did not choose me. We had both mistaken their system for love in different ways. Ashley picked up her purse. Before we left, she looked at the brass key one last time. Neither of us touched it. The closing happened several days later. I was not there. There was no reason for me to be. Mom and Dad moved into a townhouse about 20 minutes away. It was smaller but comfortable, newer than the old house, and easier to maintain. They were not destitute. They did not end up in some miserable apartment with nothing. They had simply been forced into a life that matched their actual circumstances instead of the image they had kept financing. Dad's punishment was not poverty. It was reality. For almost 30 years, his company had been proof that he was the man who could build his way out of any problem. Losing normal operations meant living without that proof. He had to watch equipment leave. He had to watch employees find other jobs. He had to accept that the advisor he dismissed had understood the direction of the business before he was willing to. Mom's punishment was different. She lost the house she had used as a social symbol. More importantly, she lost control over the story attached to it. She could tell people they downsized, but she could not erase the reception where she had announced the house belonged to Ashley. She could tell herself I turned Ashley against them, but Ashley no longer repeated that version for her. She could say family should move forward, but neither daughter automatically moved in the direction she wanted. For years, Mom had controlled us partly by defining our roles. I was the difficult daughter. Ashley was the loving daughter. I questioned. Ashley trusted. I refused. Ashley helped. I left. Ashley stayed. Once Ashley also said no, the system stopped working. Mom could no longer tell her, "Don't become like Morgan," because Ashley had already discovered that becoming a little more like me might be the only way to protect herself. Dad became quieter after the move. We spoke occasionally, mostly about practical things. One afternoon he called and asked whether I thought he should have shut down earlier. I knew the question cost him something. Yes. He was silent. Then he said, "I knew you'd say that." You asked. That doesn't mean I wanted the answer. I know. He sighed. I thought we could get through it. I know. I've gotten through worse. That's probably why you kept going. He did not answer. That was the closest we ever came to discussing the company honestly. I did not tell him that pride had destroyed it. He knew enough by then. Ashley's consequences were smaller financially but more complicated emotionally. She lost part of the design deposit. She paid a restocking fee on the dining table she had ordered too early. Her landlord had already started planning around her possible departure, but they worked it out and she renewed for another year. None of those costs threatened her career or financial stability. They were simply expensive reminders that she had made decisions before she had complete information. I did not reimburse her. I did not offer. That might sound harsh after everything she discovered, but I did not think helping her meant removing every consequence. Ashley had been manipulated by Mom and Dad. She had also been eager to believe the version that made her feel superior to me. She had helped stage my humiliation. She had bought furniture before receiving complete loan numbers. Some costs belonged to her. Compassion was not the same as rescue. Our relationship did not heal immediately. The first apology came the night she read Mom's email. Another came after the house sold. I accepted that she was sorry. I did not pretend that meant I trusted her again. For several weeks, we communicated mostly by short texts. She asked how Nathan was. I asked how work was. Sometimes she sent me a photo of something ridiculous she saw during the day. Once she sent a picture of the dining table sitting in the store warehouse with the caption, "Most expensive lesson in waiting for paperwork." I laughed. Then I caught myself laughing. Maybe that was the first sign something was changing. 3 weeks after the house closing, she sent me a message. Coffee? No explanation. No, Mom says we should talk. No family obligation. No request for help. Just coffee. I stared at it for a while. Then I typed, Saturday. 10 works. We met at the same coffee shop where I had shown her the restructuring report and the wedding emails. This time, neither of us brought a folder. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Her job, Nathan's latest obsession with reorganizing our garage, a trip Ashley was thinking about taking, a restaurant we both wanted to try. We did not mention our parents. That alone felt unfamiliar. Eventually, Ashley looked down at her coffee. I still don't know why I cared so much about winning. I knew exactly what she meant. You thought there was something to win. She nodded. I really did. So did they. She looked at me. What did you think you were winning? I considered the question. Being the daughter they couldn't dismiss. Ashley smiled sadly. Did you? No. Neither did I. We sat with that. Then she said, I am sorry. I knew which thing she meant. The reception. Her email. Choosing the moment because she thought I would not fight back. I did not make her explain it again. I know. Are we okay? Not yet. She nodded. Fair. That was one of the reasons I believed there might eventually be something worth rebuilding. Months earlier, Ashley would have argued with, not yet. She would have explained why I should forgive her. She would have asked how long I planned to punish her. Instead, she accepted that trust did not return on the same timeline as regret. We finished our coffee. When we left, she hugged me. I hugged her back. It was not a grand reconciliation. It was simply the first moment in years that being sisters felt like something we were choosing rather than a relationship our parents were managing. Looking back now, I used to think the worst thing my parents did was prefer Ashley. That was true, but incomplete. The more damaging thing was teaching both of us that love worked like a ranking system. Ashley believed she had won because she was the beloved daughter. I believed I had lost because they treated me like the difficult one who could survive without affection. But neither of those roles was love. They were functions. I was supposed to be competent enough to solve problems and guilty enough to keep helping. Ashley was supposed to be cherished enough to remain compliant. I stopped performing my role first. That was why I became difficult. Ashley stopped performing hers later. That was why she stopped being beloved the moment she said no. My parents lost the company. They lost the house. But the consequence that mattered most was losing the system that let them use one daughter against the other and call the result family loyalty. I did not take their house. I did not destroy Dad's business. I did not interfere with Ashley's lender. I did not expose Mom's email to every relative or post anything online. I kept the evidence. I asked questions. I refused to finance denial. I refused to let an apology become a bargaining chip. And when the truth was finally clear enough, I let every adult involved make a choice and live with what came after. That turned out to be enough. The last time I saw the old family house, I walked out without the microphone my father had taken from me, without the brass key my mother had tried first to give Ashley and then to give me, and without needing either of them to correct the words they had used at my wedding. For most of my life, I thought being called beloved meant being chosen. Now I knew better. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop asking people to choose you and start choosing what you will no longer carry. You should never confuse favoritism with love or sacrifice with duty. Ask for the facts before you sign, pay, or promise anything that can change your future. Healthy boundaries protect both your finances and your self-respect. If this story helped you, please subscribe to the channel for more family lessons.